Okay. I'm Elissa Richards, the chairperson of the Utah Geological Survey Board. I'd like to call this meeting of the Utah Geological Survey Board to order. It is now 8:31 a.m. on April 12th, 2023. This meeting is being held both in person and virtually with Google Meet in compliance with Utah's open meeting laws. This meeting is being recorded in its entirety. This recording is classified as public record, and the following board members are in attendance: Elissa Richards, Dave Garbrecht, Ken Fleck, Becky Hammond, Riley Breakerhoff, and Tom Faddis. And let's see, the following individuals representing the Utah Geological Survey and the Department of Natural Resources are in attendance: Bill Keach, Mike Hylland, Jodi Patterson, Cheryl Wing, Jay Hill, Jackie DeWolf, and Holly Brown. And is anybody else remote joining? Did anybody else besides Ken join remote?
Not to this point.
Okay. So the following board members are absent. We have Rick Chestnut and Sam Quigley absent.
Okay, they may yet join us. Or...
Yeah, and maybe they'll join a little bit later on. We welcome all visitors and interested persons at this time. And as a courtesy to everyone in this meeting, at this time we ask for all cell phones, pagers, and other electronic devices to be turned off or changed to silent mode. And board motions and votes must be reflected in the minutes and recorded by individual board member. And now let's proceed with the agenda.
Okay, good morning, everyone. If you're online, we'll try and recognize you as you join. And Ken, if you've got a question, just feel free to stick your hand in the air.
Okay, I will.
And if that doesn't work, butt in. Okay, we will be happy to. I actually took this picture March 3rd. We had Tanya Trujillo, who's the Assistant Secretary for the Department of the Interior. And she's over everything science and water for the Department of the Interior. So she came out, and the last day of the legislative session, we hosted her here in this room, and we talked about Earth MRI and critical minerals. Then we went out to the Great Salt Lake Marina, arranged for one of the BPS helicopters to come. And our director, Joel Ferry, gave her a ride around the lake. I got to get up there as well, so that was kind of cool. Speaking of Joel Ferry, he's our director. He's hoping to get out here. So whenever he comes, we'll just stop and you'll get a chance to meet him. So anyway, so our agenda looks something like this. You've already given us our welcome. And Joel will wander in whenever he can get here. And then we'll do some action We're going to hear near the end of the day from Jeremiah Bernau. Have any of you met Jeremiah yet? I think you probably met him as a new employee briefly. He came to us from the University of Utah, PhD with Dr. Bowen up there. He's finished. He's been running our Bonneville Salt Flats project by and large. It's work he did as a PhD student, and we're finishing that up. So you'll get an update on that project, which I think will be great to hear. It's going to really change how we look at things out of the Bonneville Salt Flats as a result of this work. So I think it'll be intriguing to have a discussion at the end from him. Mike will also talk a little bit about something called our strategic planning and seek some input from the board on that. So I guess the first thing is the contract proposals. So is there?
I have a motion to.
You have a motion.
We'll have a motion to approve those.
Okay.
All right, and can we have a motion to approve the contract proposals since our last board meeting?
I so move.
Second. Thank you. The contract proposals have been approved from the last board meeting, and we also need a motion to approve the minutes from the January 18th board meeting.
I so move.
Okay. And thank you. Great. The minutes from the January 18th board meeting have been approved.
Okay. Great. And I did double check yesterday to make sure we had all the latest contract proposals up there. So this is all of them. At least I don't. Last month or in January, Cheryl picked up some that we'd forgotten. So
I counted before I sent out the minutes. I remaining the agenda today. So
she's good. We like having Cheryl there to help us. So we'll jump over to the director's report. which will include our personnel updates. We want to talk a little bit about paleontology at some point in here. I'm going to talk about that. Some changes going on there. Retirements. We made it through a quarter without any retirements, I believe. Last year was kind of the year of retirements with Grant and Kent, both 39-year people going. We had Rich Giroux, first of the year. We did have a couple of resignations, including our beloved Core Center curator. So that'll be tough. Jessie was in one of our GIS. She transferred over to wildlife. Is that right? Wildlife? Okay.
How long's Katie leaving?
27th is her last day.
You have a lot of stuff coming up too.
We do. It's always, Tommy is not always something you can choose.
What are you going to do for the interim?
The interim will probably, that's a good question. I mean, Mike will step in. Katie and Tom can probably carry most of the day-to-day. Katie's been great in terms of the kind of the bigger vision, getting us organized. So we'll begin a search for that, figure out how we're going to do that. Just came in the last few days, so we're still thinking that out, where we're going to go and how we want to handle that. But she's done a great job. The Core Center has not been in great shape. A lot of progress has been made. New positions, promotions, almost everything. Yeah, everything on this list is a promotion. Jackson Smith, you're going to probably ask another question. Jackson Smith, he's been running our bookstore. We had an open position for a geologist in the same GIO group. He applied for that. We had 43 applicants, I think, for an entry-level job. Was it that many?
Your packet said 51.
Huh?
Your packet said 51 applications.
Then it was 51. I'll go with the packet. So 51, and so Jackson ultimately was selected out of that, which means we'll be looking for a bookstore.
Does that need to be a geologist for that position?
No, and Jackson was not hired. His official title was retail store manager. That's what the official title was. And Tori, who's in there, is a geotech. So, it could become a geologist. And that's something we're working on. Part of the problem is that retail store manager has such a low salary cap, at least in the state system, that it becomes a bit problematic. And how do we do that? So we're thinking all that through right now. We have some options, can't talk about quite yet, that may help us with that arena. Trevor in our Groundwater Wetlands program, he was promoted project geologist. It's a series, what we call a promotion. Zach Anderson was promoted as senior geologist. After all the retirements in our mapping program, we had no senior geologists left. We had a senior scientist on and then project geologist. And in our career track, it goes geologist, project geologist, senior geologist. And he'd been here long enough and was certainly merited that promotion. And then we had, with Rich Giroux's retirement as the primary landslides geologist, that was an opening we advertised for. And Ben Erickson, who's internal, was one of the interviews. And Steve selected him to promote him up. Now we got to backfill Ben. So those are promotions going on. Positions we're still working on. We're right in the middle of, or on the verge of hiring a number of GIS analysts. Because we had Kent, we had other programs that have needed some help. GSC's position, we're going to move from GIO and over to mapping. So I know for one of those positions, an offer was made and has been accepted, but they haven't started yet. So that was filled. Others, the interviews have been done. We also had in our groundwater program, we had a person, we extended an offer that has been accepted to be in that program as well. They just haven't started yet. So we're quickly filling those. Last time I said we had several of these positions to fill. We're about there now.
Would it be accurate that in the last couple of years, other departments in the DNR has hired away a number of our GIS people. I feel like that's been a trend a little bit.
I think we've hired more away from other departments. Would you agree with that? I mean, Jessie came from another department internally and moved over to us, and then she's moved on to wildlife. But the new hire is coming from water rights. And I'm trying to think who else that we.
The net inflow.
Yeah, I think they-
in and out, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a negative. We have a lot of people that like to be over here. And so, good question though. And the GIS manager, it's a bit of a work in progress because Martha Jensen had been hired and then the BLM came and raided her. And so right now Marshall has kind of assumed that responsibility for the moment. And we're working on that one. This is some probably big news that none of you have heard. Elissa asked about what big news do we have? The AASG, the Association of American State Geologists, I think I got that in the right order. Did I get that right, Mike? I always want to do Association or American Association of Petroleum Geologists. So anyway, the state Minnesota is supposed to host the 2024 meeting. We go around the country and each state takes turns hosting. And their state geologists, they hired a new state geologist. And the first thing the new state geologist says, we're not going to host that meeting next year. And so the leadership of the association got in a bit of a panic. They reached out and says, can you host this meeting? And so after much thought and contemplation, we agreed to go ahead and host it. Our biggest challenge was to find, I'm believe it or not, a year and a half out is not that much notice to reserve a venue. But Holly, if you know Holly in the back, went to work hard looking for venues, and we've identified one up in Park City, the Yarrow, which we will use as our venue. That's number one. You know this. You've had some meetings.
It's not cheap.
Finding the venue is the biggie. So we're going to host that. That'll be that first week of June. That'd be a big deal.
5-day meetings is a lot of deal.
They have, the way it usually goes is on Sunday, there's a pre-meeting field trip. Then Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday is the meeting. And then we may or may not choose to we'll probably host a post-meeting field trip. So back in 2009, it's the last time the UGS hosted this meeting. They ran on the front end, was the 4-day, they ran a 4-day field trip on the front end. And then 3-day on the back end. I thought long trips. They were both long trips. One went southern Utah and one went to like Arches and those other parts. And that's a long time. I mean, you're gonna do 4 days on field trip, 3 days of meetings, and then another 3 days. You're talking 10 days. Who can get away for 10 days? And I was on a meeting with several of the current president and past presidents of the ASG a couple of days ago. And they all suggested we go to one day field trips. We may do one overnight, but we're not going to do that big thing. And so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and on Tuesday, usually in the middle, there's a half day to 3/4 of a day field trip that's more local. And a lot of the state geologists, they bring their partners, their wives, their spouses, their husbands. Sometimes they bring their kids. And so there'll be some guest activities, there'll be some dinners. One of the things that often happens is they go look for sponsors to help defray some of the costs. We may lean on the board to help us with suggestions. Who do we chase? But as we get organized and get ready to go, if you've got ideas on things we could or should do, as we get a little closer, and get our plans a little more nailed down, we'd certainly love to have your feedback and your involvement. So it's a good opportunity to show off Utah geology. You get all the state geologists from around the country. It's pretty cool. So, any questions on that? I also, up there, you'll get a bunch of representation from USGS, Department of Energy, the Bureau of Energy Management, which is the offshore folks. The old, what they used to call it, MMS? Minerals Management Service, what it used to be called. Anyway, there'll be a bunch of feds here as well. So I just put up here, I'm gonna go through now the different programs. If you've got questions on our programs, feel free to jump in and ask. I'm just checking to see if our attendance list has changed at all. Looks like Mike Vandenberg's the only other one to join us. Okay, so lots going on in energy and minerals, you know, geothermal, critical minerals, still lots going on. I'll talk about critical minerals here in a minute. Oil and gas going on out in the paradox. You know, we have the DOE funded project we're working on out there. Carbon capture, utilization. Mike would tell you that we got a grant, or the University of Utah with whom we are partnering got a grant to look at a carbon sequestration hub sort of out in the Uinta Basin. So that project is they're in the middle of negotiating the final terms with the DOE on that. So, and a lot of private sector people are reaching out for us to do field trips and workshops.
And that's looking like that might be a $5 million grant.
I don't know the exact number. Do you remember? Mike's online. I can ask Mike.
I mean, he was significant, whatever.
It's $8 million from DOE.
8 million. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. We're glad to have you on board. This was a big deal. We had asked for 1.5 million to do bathymetric LiDAR on the Great Salt Lake and Bear Lake. And I think I have this. I thought I have it. It got funded at 1.8 million. One of our state representatives wanted to expand the area of coverage to include some of the wetlands areas. Just maybe just a little bit above the wetlands area or the shorelines. So prior to spending this much money, we had some folks in the public that kind of said, that's a lot of money to spend on that. We've already done some ping surveys in the lake, and we know how deep it is. But we counted that with LiDAR, the precision is much, much better. Because the old work that was done was basically shot, I think, a kilometer apart. And then contoured up. But but before we go spend 1.8 million, Mike's got a pilot program. We're gonna do a pilot study just off of Animal Island. And we'll try and reach into some of the deeper parts of the lake to ensure that the technology will work. So we have the money, and if the pilot study, which will be done this spring, the next couple of months works, then we'll move forward to that. So anyway, we're pretty excited about that. And that made it through. Earth MRI, this isn't much of a change. I added this. If you look at the diagram over here on the right, everywhere there's this light blue. These were all areas where LiDAR had never been acquired in Utah. And through this Earth MRI, which is the mapping resources from UGS, they're paying that 100% to finish off all the LiDAR for the rest of the state, which is a big deal, you know, in terms of mapping and stuff. Additionally, in these darker areas, they're going to fly some airborne geophysical data, gravity and magnetics over here. And this is what we thought we were going to get initially. And then they the feds extended it all the way down to here. And a lot of people, you know, there's mining districts out here, and this will help us. And what's really cool is that this data will then become public. And I believe that Rio Tinto has agreed to share with us some of their data that they've acquired out in this area. So we'll kind of almost like double what we know by getting the partnerships going. So big deal. And then Phosphoria project is one we're working on with Idaho and a couple of other servers, I think Montana. I think Idaho's running the program, but I think Idaho and Montana and Wyoming are involved as well. And we just put out a second edition of Critical Minerals in Utah. That's out if you haven't seen it. And there's still all kinds of geothermal projects going on out there that we're still running hard in. Hazards, a lot of data preservation going on. I also suspect, or expect is probably a better word, that with the rains, you know, when we meet with the executive or the directors of all the divisions every week, they're all talking about flooding and water. And I raise my hand and say landslides, rock falls. And we've already had one in Fruit Heights, some of you've seen that. Jay mentioned that you've seen some rock falls
On the side of I-80.
on the side of I-80. So, and I know this is like the 40th anniversary. I think the Thistle Slide started moving 2 days ago, 40 years ago. I may remember that, but I'm actually, when this meeting's over, I'm headed to Thistle to meet with a reporter from Fox 13. They're gonna do a big special, I think, tomorrow in the news on the Thistle Slide. So anyway, I'm worried about landslides. And we have about, I should have put the map up. There's about 100 slides up and down the Wasatch Front that we try to visit every year. Rich Giroux and Ben would go out, and Craig. So they would get out and go visit all these slides to check on them every spring after the snow. We gotta wait for the snow to melt, really, to get out so we can see what's going on the surface. Some of these slides, you know, Immigration Canyon's got quite a few active landslides that are going on. So we'll be out in the valley. This is one that's been disappointing for me. For 2 years in a row, we have asked for additional help from the state to get out and get a better idea of where these landslides are. And because part of it is that people are moving their homes, they're building more in areas that are more and more dangerous. And NBC, the KSL special on the homes are cracking, subsiding, sinking. It was on KSL like last week. And it was, they picked out one builder in particular, but part of it is that the engineering is probably not being done right to move into some of these areas. Now you add to it a super wet year, you're gonna have a bigger problem. But we've asked for 2 years in a row now, and the governor has put it in his budget. The Natural Resources Appropriation Committee has put it in their budget too, and they've approved it. At the Executive Appropriations Committee level, it gets cut. And now that we're gonna have all these landslides, I'm figuring we'll get it. If we get a good one, I'm gonna call a few representatives. Say, let's do a field trip. Because field trips are impactful, and I'll give you an example here in a few minutes of where it made a difference. But it didn't get approved again this year. We tried. The groundwater program, there's all kinds of stuff going on now. Great Salt Lake is up 3 feet. Yay, but it's still 7 feet below where it normally is. So that's a big deal, but we're glad that it's up 3 feet. It's 2 feet more than it went up last year. I think it only went up 1 foot last year during the spring, if I remember right. Then it dropped 2 feet. So anyway, we're busy in the groundwater and the wetlands program. In the last couple of years, like 5 new employees, and we're gonna add another one. The legislature funded some projects. I'll talk about that. We had proposed we were asked to submit a proposal together with water rights. I think I talked to you about this, that would build a groundwater monitoring network using INSAR data, which is satellite data that comes about every 28 days. We can monitor subsides, that kind of stuff. And so most of that got passed in the legislature. So let me jump ahead. Where was it? I thought I had, maybe I'll do it later in legislature. It got passed, but at 60% of what they had originally approved it. So it made it through the governor's office, made it through the Natural Resources Committee. By the time we got to the executive probe, they cut it by 40%. I think part of it was executive probes looking at numbers and forecasts, and they were trying to be conservative so that we end up in a recession, that they're not overextended. I'm going to put that out there that might have been their rationale. But looks like we'll need to hire a couple of new people to get there. The one thing was that we're probably going to hire a coder, probably from DTS, I believe, is what Marshall, who runs our data management, to help us build kind of a dashboard. Some people don't like the word dashboard, but certainly an app that will allow people to track groundwater conditions across the state. Our water budget studies are in high demand, particularly as times get harder for water. We delivered several, held several public meetings in the last few months that were finalized. This draft report of the Emory, Johns Valley, Bryce Canyon hydrogeology report is about ready to go through our review process. Some of you may remember we got subpoenaed for this data last year. They weren't willing to wait till the final report. So they subpoenaed us, but there's efforts down there to do more commercial development. And so as a bonus to that, they've done a septic tank density type work, because there's still no water treatment plants. Even if you put in a Marriott, you've got to put in a septic system of some sort. How far apart does that need to be? But, Division of Water Rights, they're the ones who really want these studies that helps them better adjudicate the efforts. Wetlands, they're everywhere. The Montane Wetlands project got to a certain point, and then we had did I have Miles on that resignation? I didn't put Miles up there. Who's in the notes? It's in the notes.
You did.
Okay, I didn't have it there. Miles was one of the guys working on that project, so it's on a bit of a hiatus until we get that person replaced. But the Heber Valley project is nearly done from what reports I've read. They're done on that project. They're working on trying to get a project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on how to remote sensing. But wetlands has been busy. You may remember last year, House Bill 118 required us meaning the UGS, to do a survey or a study on the feasibility of an in-lieu fees program. What it might look like, what it might cost. And they had to present an interim report last November to the legislature, which they did. And Representative Snyder's, he actually put a bill out in January to let's go do this now, not even wait for the final report. But that bill did not make it out of the legislature. But people are thinking about it. I think it might come. If you understand, anybody not understand how an in-lieu fee program works?
I kind of explained that when we were on the field trip.
Yeah.
We were up to that side.
Yeah. Basically, if you got a wetlands, it's a small piece of what you're developing, you could pay a fee to the state. We could then, working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, find a bigger project and focus funds on large projects. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. I suspect that will come back up. And so here was that project with water rights, and it got funded at 60%. It's the full amount was in the original bill and got cut at the last minute. I think they got some shaky legs over it. But we'll still go do a bunch of work. Gives us a little more flexibility. Let's see. Biggest thing is, how do we manage the growth of this program? Groundwater, I keep telling, my perception is going to continue to grow because water is not in abundance, in spite of this year. Maybe in abundance this year, but doesn't, unless we cap 4 or 5 years of this, we'll return to our problems.
How big is your fruit farm?
Oh,
Is there what?
how big are, how many people are in
Oh, and groundwater?
groundwater wetlands? 15? There's about, Michael looked it up. I'll keep going.
It's probably your biggest group.
It's our biggest group now. And we're continuing to grow it. And it's not because we have some huge high on expansion and growth. It's the need is driving growth.
About 16.
I was,
And I don't think that includes a lot of our TL temp
our tech help,
staff.
yeah.
About pushing 20 people.
So our challenge is where do you find space to put them? Right now in our building, we have an unchangeable amount of space. There's no we can't really expand into our footprint. Our footprint is fixed. So how do we figure this out? So we're looking at things like if we have people working 2 days in the office, 2 days out, we may start to see overlap. Space sharing, that kind of stuff. More people working from home. We have a common area that people can come in and plug in and stuff, monitors, and network connections and the whole thing. So it'd be interesting to see where this goes. But we're working as hard as we can to try and figure it out. But there is no ability really to expand our footprint. There's other programs that experience the same problems. Mapping, we finished last year's at 1.15 million, and we started work on this year's. And we got our new state map proposal. I think we'd asked for 800,000 from the feds, which would have made it 1.6 million, which would have been dwarfed. The hard part on a state map for me, is finding the match. Because for every dollar they give us, we got to find $1 of our own. So we could, if we could have unlimited money, we could grow this state map program to be even bigger. But we've been kind of telling folks, you don't have to ask for all the money. Because we are constrained by ours. There's a lot of surveys that would love to have this much money, but they don't have anywhere near the size of staff that we do.
State of Colorado, rough equivalent, they have a shadow of what this is.
They got like 5 people or something. Yeah, they're pretty small. And I think in New Mexico, they use mostly contract people. Wyoming does the same thing. But there's a lot of states that can't ask for the amount of money that's available. So we got 620 out of the 800,000 that we asked for. And if you saw in the notes, I think from Stefan, that we get ranked very highly.
They earned second.
I think he said second in our proposal. And it was pretty close.
That's 97 out of 100.
And that's good. I mean, it says a lot about the quality of our folks in our mapping program. They do great work.
So what projects are you approving? Like where do you guys want to be mapped?
You could ask the SMAC committee chair. Are you the chair of the SMAC committee?
I am.
So there's certain parts of the state that you want to focus on, right?
Right. They were, I think it's mostly just filling in 1 to 24,000 quads, like around Salt Lake Valley and Ogden Valley and over towards Camas.
Yeah.
Those areas mostly.
And then there's some 30 by 60s that we're trying to get updated
Yeah.
and filled in that aren't done. I think northwest part. And we would love to do some mapping down in the southeast part on the reservation, because those areas have not been mapped really. We met a week ago with the tribal liaisons representing from the state. He coordinates with all the tribes, what the state does. So we met with him last week and we got an invite to attend the next intertribal meeting. And we're gonna start to try and establish some relationships so we can get onto some of these places. And you'll probably see us getting out to visit some of the local council meetings. And so we found that is probably the most effective, make that. So like out in Goshute and Ivapaw, they were, I remember a couple of years ago, they called us and thought they'd had like an earthquake, and it wasn't. It was something else. It was like a weather event that created a big giant boom and dust was flying everywhere all along the mountains there. Steve Bowman dutifully gets in his car and drives all the way. Ivapaw is not an easy place. Way out there on that Nevada-Utah border. And then later when we were trying to get permission to fly this airborne data, which covers some tribal lands, I was able to pick up the phone and call Rupert. Rupert Steele, he just passed recently, but last year I was up calling Rupert, and he remembered that we had been there personally, and he gave us permission into the feds to fly the data. I went down to Cedar City and met with Karina Bowe, who's the chairwoman of the Paiute tribes. And she says, "You're the first person to come visit us here." Wow. But my point is, if we get out to the councils and meet with them, I think we'll have better success to get onto some of the res lands, tribal lands. Well, that's an effort we're going to try and make. That's some of our mapping program efforts. Thank you, Becky. We're in the process of filling these GIS. I already mentioned that. And I guess Lehigh Hintz collections he'd had in his garage forever. At some point it was donated to us, and according to Stefan, a third of all of our maps comes from his collection. I did not know that, but we did field camp, Becky and I, with Lehigh Hintz. That man was a mapper. And
Yes, he
so,
was. Very good.
and what?
And he was very good.
He was very good. So they're going to rename our archive the Lehigh FNC Geological Map Archive. And so we're in the process of getting all that scanned, not scammed. and this is part of the data preservation funding that we've gotten to get this stuff preserved. Stefan is in Denver today. They're trying to form an Intermountain Coalition to coordinate mapping across multiple states. And it's Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada to build kind of cohesive maps, work out our edge, our boundary conditions, because Colorado might map it differently than we do. Same thing at the Nevada side. They want to build these big regional transects, so they're trying to figure out how to form a coalition and how they're going to fund it. I met with all those state geologists from those other things earlier this week to talk about the meeting, but since I'm here today, Stefan's representing us there. But we'll see where it goes. But it's a big effort to kind of coalesce. I don't know if you know, the feds have a standard. No, but they have a statutory obligation from our Congress to have a national geologic map by 2030. And they're now racing to try and get there. There's an older one that exists, but it's, there's a lot of compromises to make that map. Anyway, that's what's going on today. Paleontology, this is again, another big announcement for us is that in June, we are actually hosting here this Mesozoic Terrestrial Ecosystems Conference. That's like the top paleo folks from around the world will be here. We'll be actually hosting it in our building. We got a bunch of field trip plans, but that'll be in June. Jim Kirkland, our state paleontologist, will be the host of that. So anyway.
Take the megablock with them.
Huh?
We're going to take the megablock with them when they do.
Yeah. So the megablock, yeah. We'll come to that here. We're almost there. Talk about the megablock. We continue to be involved in the national parks. I think we're the only state survey they engaged to help map paleo. But they've got 5 of them in our state. So I know last week we were down in the Glen Canyon area. There's a hadrosaur they found in Bryce Canyon they'd like us to come help with. We're continuing to be mapping, doing inventories in canyon lands. So let's see if anybody jumped on this meeting. Hang on a second. Checking our attendance list. So maybe they're watching on YouTube. I had an email or a text this morning that there may be other people watching for this discussion. So I'm going to I'm gonna pull this up. Y'all got a copy of this, right? In your packet. And so if you've read it, I guess our big question is, what do we do with it? With this block?
Have you had any groups that are licensed that have offered to take it?
License that. There are some university groups that would be interested in parts of it.
Then you have that 2-year project where you gotta pay people 2 years to break it apart then, right? So they're gonna take.
Well, that's one of the options, is to take it apart.
Because the funding for the 2 years of work is probably the problem, right? That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of time and money, and we've proposed for the last 2 years, again, it's kind of like my landslide one. I proposed that we get additional tailing off the curator. Because Scott Matson, bless his heart, this fellow, he worked on this on his own time, on his own dime, raised money to pay himself to do the work. You know, we got it moved here right before the pandemic, which turned out to be a godsend, which allowed him to work on it. But he's gotten to the point where I'm not gonna raise any more money. And I don't know how, he's older than I am, and I'm 67, so. He's basically said, okay, I'm done unless you guys can find more ways to fund this. So at the moment, it's just sitting there.
Point Mountain doesn't want it again.
Point Mountain doesn't want it, and they didn't really have the staff to work on it. When you say Point Mountain, we're talking about the Dinosaur Museum at Thanksgiving Point, Discovery Center, I think they call it. What they want are fossils that they can have the public wander in and touch and look at while they're working it. This is a pretty delicate operation. And so there's some options, you know. A thing that complicates this is we don't have authority to dictate where it goes and gets stored. That authority lies wholly with the Natural History Museum. So we're going to work on some efforts to maybe improve that. There was a bill passed. I'll just talk about it now rather than we get later. House Bill 396 was a bill proposed by a freshman representative from Tokerville, Washington County area. And this last year, you may remember that we asked you to allow us to designate as a paleontological landmark. So
Johnson Farm.
At Johnson Farm, yeah. The St. George Discovery Center, Dinosaur Discovery Center at Johnson Farm. I think some long name. The point is that, so we approached the city to get their permission because they own some of the land. That was part of the deal. And the city said no. They weren't ready. I don't think they realized it. And we went to the AG's office and checked, and the city-owned lands are considered a subsidiary of state-owned lands, which means they're subject to, if they want to dig it up, they had to get a permit from us. If they want to put it in a museum, they got to get permission from the Natural History Museum. So any dinosaurs they found on city-owned lands had to go through that approval process. And they found that to be probably more onerous than they wanted. And to their credit, historically, there's been a lot of fossils that have been discovered in some of our rural areas, excavated, packed up, and hauled away. And the local communities never have an opportunity to share in what you can do and how you can use them. Can they benefit? Can they set up their own museum? So the bill that was put forth was to allow cities and counties that wanted to take control of those resources, not require permission from the state paleontology for permit or from the History Museum, or they get repositories. That bill, I mentioned before the meeting started that this was an extraordinarily busy year during the legislative session for me, and it was things like this. So we went up immediately and we said, wait a minute. We had a big problem with that because we felt like they should hold themselves to the same standards that the state holds us to. Because we have statutory rules on what we can do. And so ultimately the bill was carved out to say that they would be held to the same standards, meaning they had to have a paleontologist on staff. They also had to have a museum that could handle this sort of thing, and they would have met federal guidelines or had a specific plan to do so. And it also said in the final bill, not cities and counties, but cities of a first or second class size. And that may not mean to a lot of people, but a first class city is a city that has at least 100,000 people in it. And a second class city has at least 65,000 people in it. So of the 11 cities in Utah that are first or second class, 10 of them are between Provo and Ogden. One of them, St. George, which is a second class city. So the bill in the end only benefits that one city entity. And they have a museum and they've got a full-time paleontologist. And so they're well on their way. So we had to narrow that down. We had to get the museum to agree. But this opens up a bigger question. Your question, and a long answer, but is there anywhere else we can take this?
I mean, just come up with 2 full-time people for 2 years to break it apart just doesn't seem likely, right?
Well, right now, the legislature has not chosen to fund those opportunities.
And the Natural History Museum wants control of it, but they don't want to take it.
They don't want to take it.
And so I'm gonna think.
They have nowhere to put it.
So we're kind of left with that we just got to give it to someone who's willing to take it and has the.
But we can only do that if this Natural History Museum approves that.
Yeah, it's kind of a damn if you do, damn if you don't, though. They weren't willing to take it, but they want to have control of it. That seems.
Yeah. You are absolutely right. And there are people that are probably going to be working in the legislature over the next year to address this issue. I don't know what direction it will head, but as a state, we probably need to do we need to take a deep look at how we handle our diet. I mean, it's Utah. How many big fossil finds do we have? How many new species or genuses or whatever have we found in the last 20 years? And how many more are yet to be found? But we're not dedicating any staff to do it right. Jim Kirkland was telling me that the U hasn't taken a new PhD student in paleo in like 20 years. It's been a long time. BYU only has a master's program. They have a great paleo facility. And they're one that could take this block and handle it. But my understanding is the U doesn't want to approve that.
Of course they do.
It was one of my original proposals. The BYU, they had a better facility than we did. They could handle this. They got a big warehouse. They got a giant crane that runs down the middle of their warehouse, and they could pick this thing up and move it as needed. The concern now is if we tried to move it en masse now, is that we would cause more damage to the fossils that are in there. Better to break it up first.
I mean, so the problem is it's part of the core building, right? And we're getting a bunch more core here.
Yep.
So they're already stuffed here. So it seems like it's going to be an ongoing problem, right?
Yeah. So this was the first time to break the blocks into smaller chunks. The part of the problem is that the museum didn't have a floor space that can handle the weight.
And that times.
The way they built that building, they couldn't handle that. So that's one option, is to break it up. The other one is to find another place to take it, but we'd have to get the Natural History Museum to be on board for that.
Are they really against us handing it to someone else?
Well, it'd probably end up having to go out of state. It'd be a big expense to move it.
The receiving location would be responsible for that, though.
Maybe. And so Jim Kirkland's working with some folks. I don't remember what school. Harvard. There's some people over there that are trying to get an NSF grant. They could fund a curator to come out here and do the work. That's an idea that's on the table. Could we find another university that could get a grant? See, as a state agency, I can't go get a National Science Foundation grant. Those are reserved for academic institutions, which is interesting. So some state surveys are tied to universities. We are not. So we would need to find a university that's willing to get a student and go get the NSF money and then come out here and do the work. And there are plenty of people who want the fossils out of it and want to do research on it. So these are things we need. If you've got some ideas, we're happy to, some buttons you can push or things you can pull, we're happy to listen on any of those.
Do you need anything from the board today on that?
No, don't need anything from the board, but I want it to be aware is that if you've got ideas, if you want to think over the next few months and in the next meeting, we can recoalesce. Like I said, I suspect there's going to be some efforts at the legislative level to change maybe some of how things are decided. And if you've got ideas on how you think it ought to look, I'm happy to entertain those. So one option would be we give all of our paleo guys to the university of St. John, and then they own the whole thing. Another one is that we take that authority and it comes to us. I can't take it to the legislatures. And then we could choose where it could go. We could have a better direction on it. Those are kind of two end member options. The ones that have been talked about. I'm not sure that either one is the best solution. Anyway, just so you're aware. There are people that want to build a museum out at Utah Raptor State Park and put it out there and hire a paleontologist. That'd be like a few miles from where it came from. But state parks is like, we're not having a museum out here. The cost is too much. The amount of money it would take to build a museum is huge. In most places that have museums and state parks are not profitable. And under current statutes, state parks have to pay their own way. They don't rely on general funds for operation. They have to generate enough revenue to pay their own way. So I can see why they'd be resistant to building a museum. But if it's not going to pay for itself, what's the point? Anyway, we don't need a decision, but any other discussion, comments, thoughts, suggestions?
Is there anybody at BYU that would apply for an NSF grant?
Yeah, I think maybe, yeah. Part of the problem is without a PhD program, it's a little harder to chase that.
The guy that would do it, he's currently the
Department chair.
and so he's got his hands full just running the department.
Oh,
And Rod Sheets is also,
How far is Rod's from? Yeah, he's getting close to retirement.
yeah, well, so is Brooks. Brooks is my age. So the paleo world is getting old. No pun intended.
good one.
In Utah it is. We have to think seriously about who we're gonna, Jim Kirkland and Don are, they're a pair. And Martha, it's probably a trio. When one retires, the others will retire. It's not like we're gonna be having this. I would love, that's why I have proposed for 2 years in a row that we get another paleo person. Because now I can work on the transition. That's my forward thinking about this, is that we need to bring another person in so we can have a transfer of knowledge. It's tough when a group walks out the door and there's nobody already in place to carry that knowledge.
I mean, just speaking for myself, I think if you do talk to anybody, having the also authority rest with the Natural History Museum associated with University of Utah seems short-sighted. Seems like an extra handcuffs that probably doesn't help.
And that's what's currently in statute. That's currently in statute. I suspect though that this bill, House Bill 396, is going to open a bit of a Pandora's box. Because Garfield County, they're going to come and say, well, we want to do this.
And Vernal's not a first-class city, but they're going to say we already have, best museum in the state.
And they're not a first-class county. They're not a third.
Don't say that out there.
Is that a native son?
Yeah, that's right.
No, I'm talking about population. What's interesting is Utah County, it's not a first-class county. We don't have enough population. Salt Lake County is the only first-class county by definition in the state. So anyway, I'm eager for ideas and suggestions. Feel free if you think of something, send us a note. When we put it on the agenda, we could cover up more time in the next meeting.
I might just add, we were asked by DNR administration for kind of focus topics to try to address during the interim legislative session, and this is one that we highlighted. So hopefully we'll have some opportunity, May, June, possibly, or this summer. So as anything may develop, we'll keep you in the loop.
I mean, is there any cost associated to the UGS and just closing the door and viewing it there? I mean, obviously taking up space and spaces that are paying. Like, what's the problem with keeping it there? Do we have like a time limit on how long we just keep it there?
Well, I'm knowing that Mike Vandenberg is online.
I mean,
Mike and I would have some, I would say it's fine to leave it there. Mike would say he would love to have that space.
I'm a pro core guy too. I'd love to have the core space, but
Now, I will tell you that during our tenure here, mine as the director, we spent the money to refurb that room. Because when I first walked into that room, the mess. It was the insulation hanging from the ceiling. It was wrapped up in the garage door. The garage door didn't work. It had to chain it shut. There was nothing that wasn't sheetrock on the walls. There was no temperature control. So we've invested a fair amount to make that room viable for the moment.
Hey, Bill, this is Mike.
Yeah. Hey, I knew you'd come in if I said something about you.
You know, I consider that room the mega block room, and that it can stay there forever for all intents and purposes. But I'm more concerned about the paleo material that's in the current warehouse and how it's scattered all over on pallets and not really cleaned up. And most of it's supposed to be at the University of Utah, but they won't take it. That's my concern, not the mega block room.
And I would agree with you, Mike. They had 100 boxes they had stored here. And a year ago, they promised they'd have them all out. And we still think I got 50 of them. Even though they made a commitment, so. Yeah. And again, it's partly because we don't have the authority. I can't just pick it up and haul it down there. I guess I could take it to the front door, the end of the timeline.
I offered to haul all the boxes and set them in the lobby at the museum.
Well, I was gonna send them out along the timeline, you know. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your input. Okay. Anything on this before we move on? Guess not. Okay. GIO. You know, we've done maps on the Hill for a long time. During the legislature, every day there's some activity going on, kind of in the dome area. We've done maps and stuff. This year, our XI Wetlands program posted it. It was mostly we talked about wetlands. But we also did rec on the Hill for the first time. When I'm talking about geology, Tori Duncan from the bookstore and with Mark Milligan's help, the two of them went up and did a great job, had great attendance. So trying to get our word out there. And we are all, Jackie can tell you this. She's in GIO. You're always busy getting information out.
Yes.
She does all, have you met Jackie before? Anybody? We should have introduced you, Jackie. I'm sorry. This is Jackie DeWall. She basically controls most of our social media content. Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
Yeah.
So kudos, you're great kudos. Your most popular post right now is?
Probably Little Grand Canyon.
Little Grand Canyon? Yeah. I made a comment and I've had a dozen comments on my comment.
Yeah.
Little Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
That and the Thistle Slide have both been popular. But Jackie does a great job, you know, and it also invokes a lot of questions. So get a lot of walk-ins. We had a gentleman walk. Did you see the picture yesterday? You were out yesterday. Did you see it? According to Martin Milligan, a gentleman walked into the bookstore yesterday, and he had seen a picture on a magazine when he lived in Arizona like 20 years ago of a place in Utah. And he wanted to, now he was in Utah and he wanted to go see this place. Did you see it? He made a diorama, a three-dimensional model with little hills and a tree and grass. And so this is what I'm looking for.
Did you find it?
No.
Oh.
But it had a unique shape. But it was, anyway, it was like, but we get that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
People walk in and they want to know, what is this? Or that. Oh, do you have it?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How do I find that? Oh,
Do you mind if I?
yeah, that's anyone else wants to see it.
Does that look familiar?
Jim Davis didn't know where it was?
Yeah.
Could you narrow that down?
Bears ears, right?
Oh, yeah, Ferry's here. Maybe that's what.
Maybe that's what it could be.
Anyway. So my point is we get a huge amount of interesting, sometimes, I had a voicemail last year from a guy in Arkansas at 3 a.m. in the morning saying he had a fossil and he wasn't joking. Look at it. But we get calls from all over the country on this kind of stuff. So anyway, we are actively and busy and going on. And you're probably working on some of this stuff too, aren't you? Are you helping with these web pages? The
I
design?
haven't done much with the design. I was helping with the logo.
With the logos, okay. Other agencies are actually tapping into our resources now on a fairly frequent basis. The DNR admin also reached out to us to make a lot of stuff for Joel's work. Joel didn't come yet. And part of trying to keep track of our books, I think we talked about this in the last meeting. We asked the bookstore to kind of keep kind of an informal track of who comes and why they're coming to the bookstore. So I wouldn't say this is like 100% of all the people that walked in and out of our bookstore, but it gives you an idea of what people are coming in for. If you haven't been in, you know, we've done some updating down there. Jackson and Tori have done a great job of cleaning up, reorganizing, getting rid of some old stuff. We've got a monitor in there now. I've got some old antique type maps that you might be interested in getting.
That's like 8 people a day that come through. Is that pretty accurate?
No, that's weeks.
No, I'm just taking how many visits.
Divided by 40.
Oh.
It could be, yeah. Some days are busier than others. Weekends, I think Fridays get a little busy. So anyway, that's an idea. Did y'all get the new brochure?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yep. We updated that. I'm gonna try and get moving there so we can get hit our break. Data management, they continue to work on, I don't know how many projects. You know, they seem to have like 30 or 40 projects at a time that they're working on. And they're always trying to find new ways or better ways to inventory data. I know they were working with the core center to find a way to inventory our whole core center, building up an appropriate database for that. But there's a lot going on. So funding and budget, this is my comments that I'm going to turn to Jodi in a minute, but this year, we're going to be in an interesting year. And help me correct me if I'm wrong, Jodi, but we're working hard to not have to give any money back to the state this year, which is an excess. We may have more than our carryover allows. Jodi can go into more details on that. But next year, because of targeted raises, we may be in a hard place to meet all of our needs, which will be a really interesting situation. We give money back, but we won't have enough to get to the next year. That's kind of the point. what's interesting is mineral lease revenue has been, we had initially, we said we thought 2.4, and then we dropped the forecast at the beginning of the year at 2.2. It's the slide I showed last time. But as of today, and Mike can chime in, but his latest number to us was about 2.4, back up to 2.4. And so prices are, so that roller coaster is hard. I mean, gas prices in Utah, not gasoline, natural gas. The national average is down to around a little over $2 for an MMCF of gas. But if you're in the basin, there are people that are getting $30 to $60 in the spot market for an MMCF of gas. Huh? Not you. You're selling on long-term contracts.
No, we stopped takeaway.
Oh, you know what?
We don't have the takeaway, so it's all going to.
Oh, you're burning it. Oh. So, yeah, it's been kind of crazy to see. And part of that's because, a lot of our supply can go west. And in California, with all the rain and all the snow, they've been sucking on. It's funny for a state that says they want to not have any natural fuels. They sure are sucking hard on it here. We put out a report last year about why gas prices are higher in Utah. Didn't you read that report? You see it. And it was mainly because we are tied more to the California market than we are, say, the Colorado market. Yeah, because the pipeline goes from Salt Lake refineries, goes down to Las Vegas. And then from there, it can be transferred to go to California. There's a lot of demand for Utah refinery product in California. So we're much closer tied to that price market than we are to, say, going over the border to Fruita or to Grand Junction or something. Much different because of that. So anyway, volatile numbers. We talked about Senate Bill 133, and I'll just give you an update. There was a bit of contention between us and the State Tax Commission. Do you remember this discussion where?
It's what funds.
What?
The next slide. Or I think you had numbers on the next slide. Right? Yeah, there you go.
There we go. So in August, September, last year, they took 2 true-ups where they took that much money out of our account. And what it was based on was, how do we interpret the law? And the law said a deposit will be made at the end of the year. And so the question was, does it include that? If you did it on June 30th, does it include that fiscal year up to June 30th? And it turns out that the State Tax Commission said no. It was the year before that. It wouldn't include up through that year. Last year was a really good year for severance tax in Utah. They said it didn't. And so they swept that money from our account. There was also an appeal. Someone I can't remember who was it, asked, they went to the AG's office and asked them what it should say. AG's office said it should be on June 30th of that year. And then the governor's office of planning and budget said, no, it should be the previous year. Ultimately, they chose to ignore the AG's office. And then they made some changes in the legislation this year to better define that. So they went with the interpretation that the state had. Now, we'll still get that money. It'll just happen in June 30th of this year. We could have had some this is the first time we've had a reserve account. So the result was that for this fiscal year, we had $14,000 on the reserve account. And we didn't ask to use any of it. So the reserve account carries money over from year to year.
Well, we had asked, we did plan on a couple building blocks to use it, and then when we found out about this, we had to cancel those building blocks
Yeah.
to be funded with the restricted account. And
I think we were going to probably fund that paleo stuff.
yeah, that was one of them, yeah.
So we were going to fund with that. So hopefully we'll see so this year's going to be another good year. So we'll have had last year, which will give us some money for this next coming year that we can look at. But so it did get resolved. I think I had a interpretation resolved by changing the law.
Did you receive a full explanation?
We met with the state tax commission. What was funny was in that meeting, they admitted they made a mistake. They were in the process of trying to figure out how to get us the money they were taking away. So that was interesting because based on the AG's opinion to the tax commission, they needed to give it to us. And then while they're trying to figure out how to give it to us, Governor's Office of Planning Budget said, no, it needs to be the other way. So now there is they defined, I think they cleaned up the language. So moving forward, at least we know what it is.
I know an operator in Uinta Basin is putting 24 horizontal wells on federal land through Q1 of next year. So we get $200 million development going there. So you guys should get some.
Yeah, good. We're looking forward to it. Okay. Targeted raises. Do you want to talk? Okay, what do you want to talk about? I'll let you talk about impact. I'll talk about the what. Okay, I don't want to cut you off. Okay. So last year, you may remember that the governor proposed that senior geologists and GIS analysts get targeted raises. What that did for our geology career track, it really skewed. It moved the senior geologist numbers up higher, and everybody else was left behind. And to the point where some of our senior geologists are making more than our program managers. Had the potential anyway. So we did a pretty diligent effort and submitted we went and looked at the U.S. labor statistics, Bureau of Labor Statistics. We looked at our state surveys, what salaries were, and we went through and identified for all of our other career track positions how far behind market they were, position by position along our career track. We submitted that to the HRM. So the governor then proposed a budget in which all the other career tracks got up, which was good.
Yeah.
And Jodi will talk about why it's not good. I'll let her do the bad news.
I was a little unclear on what the budget. So how much does this inflate your?
Yeah, I'll have some numbers on that.
She's got some numbers on that. Yeah, I'll have her. That'd be good.
Short answer, a quick answer is $1 million.
Out of our pocket that we gotta find, right?
No, in total, it's about 1.1 million. And only about 45% of that was funded, general funded. So you have to come up with the difference.
So that'll take a bunch of our carryover. So anyway, that was approved and funded. And nothing, okay. So Mark's already working on our file while we're in the meeting. Okay. Thank you, Mark. I mentioned last summer we'd taken all these legislators on tours of the aqueducts. The governor proposed 50 million out of the 175 that was asked. There was a bill put forth by, was it Christensen? Was it K? Stofferson? It was K. Anyway, for the full 175, neither one of them made out of the Natural Resources Committee. But we got to the Executive Appropriations Committee and they put back in and approved the $50 million, which was kind of a big deal because, here's a project that we worked on and we didn't get a dime. Not a single dime came to the UGS, but it really highlights what our mission is, which is to provide really good information, scientific information to the public and legislators on things that they need to attend to. So I thought this was big. It's a big win for us without being a big win financially, is what it means.
So where does the funding go?
It got appropriated to water resources and find a way to share that out with the different water conservation districts. So depending on the 4 main districts that we were working with.
It'll rebuild the aqueduct.
they'll start to rebuild it. So they had a fair amount of money in the districts themselves, you know, through bonds and through what they call brick grants, which come from FEMA. There's a fair amount of money there. It just made a shortfall across the 4 districts to meet that need to get it going now. For most of the waters, they're gonna have to wait 10 years to start the work. We're already 7 years into our forecast of a 57% chance of a magnitude 6 or bigger. And if we were at another 10 years, now we're 17 years into that 50-year forecast. And so this will allow them to accelerate that effort. And I suspect there'll be a request again next year to keep this project going, but allow some of the districts to get going right away. But Water Resources will be the allocator of that. So I kind of had us at a break now. I'm a little bit out of schedule. So any questions? I don't see any questions online.
I got word from Nathan, Joel isn't gonna be able to make it.
Okay,
Got pulled away.
that happens. He did show up last week to meet you.
You just weren't here.
We always weren't here. Wires got crossed somewhere, but he did make an effort. So that does happen. Okay, so I say, are we ready to take a break? I'm ready to take a break.
Yeah.
Take a break. And when do we want to reconvene? It's 10 minutes, 5 minutes? How long do you need?
5 minutes, I don't know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
That's good.
So let's say 9:55.
Okay.
That's 7 minutes.
Yes. Nice.
7
There you go, 9:55, we will be back. Okay.
During our city council meeting last night, we've had some basements flooded. Somebody said over 100 homes there have had water come into their basements. And,
There's a sinkhole. this
everybody's
morning,
like
too.
wondering.
There's a sinkhole?
A big sinkhole, it was on the news this morning, and it was in a subdivision. I didn't catch where it was, but all like the cars started moving towards the sinkhole, and a whole bunch of like dumpsters were.
Whoa.
Oh,
Were you? Yeah.
No, it's a groundwater shortage, but
Yeah.
an excess.
My son, at 9:24, somebody picture up in Kaysville.
Is it Casey?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what they were showing on the news.
Yeah.
oh, wow.
My son, who's a realtor,
Wow.
said, I showed houses there Saturday.
Oh.
And they asked if I'd be worried about runoff. He goes, I said, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh,
The son of a geologist.
perfect.
It said not to connect it.
Do you like it? I'm trying to debate whether to keep it.
No.
Looks very geology.
It will have to come off sometime.
I wish I could do that, but
When I teach my class at BYU in the fall, I have to live by the standards of the university.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Warming up and now I'm getting it from out.
Although nowadays you see a lot more students.
So can you use the 8 hours of governor approved, to be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing my own stand dining project?
I have
I've seen
to,
girls
like,
wearing
spend my time where I can go do that.
Oh, shoot, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, still not allowed, because there are people doing it.
It was kind of
Yeah,
scandalous.
I have a couple
when we were
windows.
there.
So the camera's working.
If you
Oh,
go
yeah.
to
This
like
one got it.
But so far, my
across
cell phone
campus,
is keeping
you
it
Oh,
on.
yeah.
It's running
Where do you live?
in Farmington.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, right on
BYU.
the bottom of the bench, so.
Oh.
So I'm at the end.
Right,
It's
you're gonna be the
coming down,
catch-all of
Yep.
everything, yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I have a
man.
big pool in my backyard.
Oh my gosh.
Everything's changed.
I have had flooding in my basement before.
They are.
Many years ago.
Right.
Gotta do something like that, it's going out to my front yard, and it's funny to see people walk by, because it's just, it's coming on every, like, 2 seconds.
I think.
Close out the, trumps out the water,
Right.
that's going down my front yard.
Yeah, everyone's like, where is this coming from?
Wow. I'm just,
This ground is so saturated.
yeah.
What is it? Well,
Well,
I don't
hopefully
think-
nothing happens between now and when we have time to,
Yeah.
just tell Bill we need to take the afternoon off.
Yeah.
people.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's important.
Well, the places that have the sand, usually the public works, they're just have
The price is gonna be
same
good.
hours a week or.
Yeah.
It's like.
Right.
Can you just go pick up sandbags, or you actually
Yeah,
have
you
to go
have
and
to do
like
it.
fill them
You have
yourself?
to do it yourself, all the places have to do it yourself.
All the homes.
You didn't buy the bags.
Yeah,
Yeah.
take a shovel or.
Yeah.
And that's why this bill, how much?
My neighbor has some, I don't know what he's had them out for a couple of weeks.
No, they took it.
Does everyone in your neighborhood have
They
sump
build them,
pumps?
they build them.
I mean, is that kind of known for basement flooding up there?
Talked to my neighbors,
They do. I guess it was my
Yeah, I
first
know.
thought when we had to move it out.
I'm not very.
Let's think about what you-
No, exactly. It's like, keep to yourself and,
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Oh.
yeah.
Well, think about
I don't really have anything in common. I mean, I guess you could wave and just, hi.
But the museum controls the where.
So, yeah, I would assume they would, at least the ones I'd be on the lower, or kind of the lower end of the neighborhood.
Mhm.
The ones that
No, geez.
Exactly.
Well, if you
I'm
need
not
like.
too worried because it's, I know my songs are pretty well.
Right.
And it gets like.
I know.
Suddenly just
all
a
such
big,
big-
yeah,
Yeah, that's where I'm like.
tsunami.
Sounds like.
Jeez. Well, I would say if you need, UGS to put together a sandbagging brigade. come up and help you.
I think
Hey,
He's the guy that, he advocated for this house. And I said, this is a friend of mine, he races Chris.
Oh, yeah.
I remember in
And,
Anyway, I think.
like 70s, 80s,
yeah.
when they diverted down the water.
Run over here?
But that's
Oh,
why
yeah,
I bring it to the
83,
bill.
yeah.
My mom.
Notification
policy.
Oh, yeah, right there. We were just,
Yeah, I remember that as a childhood memory.
yeah, it's like, oh, I remember down State Street. Yeah, I know, like the news has been talking about, like, we're gonna have another, 1983 flooding, but so far, I guess, like, the public utility guys.
So is are my slides in this?
Yeah, there's big, yeah, the other things have been like implemented, so.
Assume so, because did you edit them?
Well, I didn't edit Bill's PowerPoint. I just put my slides in that folder, so they were available.
Maybe that was the notification then.
I put them in there last night.
That
makes things up.
You'd have to look on
Okay.
it.
Oh, he's right. Okay,
It's
well,
in Google Drive.
Yeah, and that's what we need, that's why I
yeah,
bring it.
if they're not there, you can switch over.
Us.
Wait, I guess I could look online.
I shared your photo. Well, because Bill was telling it, the group, like, he was telling out the board about.
Oh, you shared it
the
with the
diary.
board?
Yes,
That
because
one.
Bill was telling everyone about it, but it's, I was doing it more of just like a nondescript.
Remember
But
when?
that it was just like a nondescript, like, where are these two mountains in a tree?
Bear's ears.
Yeah, that's what Hylland said was Bear's Ears.
I was like, Jim Davis didn't even know?
I know.
He was looking, but
Ollie was like,
Nathan got involved now.
I didn't believe these in a photo.
I know, yeah. it's-
Nathan said he was gonna ask you, Gene.
Oh, that's awesome.
What about Ron? You just shared?
UGS shared, yeah.
Are you over in the?
Yes, till Friday.
Adam? Yeah, I don't have access to it.
Maybe you don't, yeah. Oh, well, either they're in his presentation.
Okay.
Mark, are you talking about what is it that you're looking for?
I was just wondering if Bill put the slides in his PowerPoint.
I brought a PowerPoint that says Mark, you have stuff for 2022 overview.
Legislative?
I have one of yours up here.
So are you just gonna switch to?
Yeah.
Okay. That'll work. That's all I have.
We'll use yours. I had it open because I started getting messages that you were editing.
I didn't change anything, so I'm not sure what. I opened it to see if it was there.
So, Mark, how many?
Oh.
Remember that one?
John and I mean.
Do that again.
Okay.
He was building a diagram of what he saw.
Okay.
You know who's on this?
So does Peter and Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anybody named Sam.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the best.
We're gonna do it together.
Paul,
So
Mike,
three.
man. Okay,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate
I'm
it.
just trying to give you that heads up.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that would be a
Okay.
fun.
Yeah, I got 9:55.
Yeah.
9:55 is, I mean, we got 2 more
Okay,
minutes.
Tom and Tom. So who's stronger, Tom?
Well, he about put me to my knees right there.
You know, Tom and Tom.
Right.
Are you going?
Yep.
Okay. So we're back. I'm gonna turn some time over to Jodi, talk about financial stuff. I've already had a couple people come talk about ideas potentially for dinosaur stuff, so keep that discussion going. And what we can do to reach on that. So,
Bring up my slides.
yep, I'm trying to get, there we go. Okay,
Do you have a link to that?
I do.
Okay, that'd be great if you could bring that up. Mark it a little bit for everybody.
I think it's actually
That one right there, yeah.
down there,
You can share that.
and I will bring it over onto the screen.
Okay, first I'm gonna talk about our current year forecast. This is through February. The March one will be done later this week, so I just missed the meeting by a couple days. But, can you
Where would you like me to go?
get rid of all that stuff at the top?
How do I get rid of that?
Yeah, or even drag, put your cursor on the middle of the line and just kind of slide it up.
Oh,
See if you can get it, see if we can just.
Unclick that all show ribbon.
Yeah. Maybe. Oh. Oh, okay, that'll,
that work?
yeah, that helps.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so like I mentioned, this is through last month. We, in the highlighted yellow right there, we're forecasting 2.6 million of a balance. That seems pretty high, but if you,
Sorry,
you take into account that about 420, almost 421,000 of that is reserved for the Great Salt Lake groundwater study. And another about 332,000 is for the Bonneville salt flats that we estimate both of those projects carrying over to the next fiscal year. That leaves us with that 1.8 million that we estimate carrying forward or having as a surplus. However, in that box there, we only have authority. We have to get authority from the legislature every session on what we could carry over. And so you can see our total authority there is 2,056,400. And that is split up specifically in those separate amounts, the 420,700 for the Great Salt Lake, 331,400 for the Bonneville salt flats. So the general operating is the 1.3 million you see there. So if you compare that 1.3 to the 1.8, that difference highlighted there is about 555,000. That's what we are in jeopardy of losing because we only have authority to, I'll calm some of your nerves in a minute. We only have authority up to the 1.3 for the general. And this month, the last month and this month, I worked with program managers to get a more accurate revenue forecast. Up above, you can see that about 3.2 million was what is currently forecasted as outside revenue. When I say outside revenue, that's all of our grant funding. That could be in the form of federal funds or dedicated credits or transfer funds from other, state entities or universities. That's considered transfer, but that's all, grant funding. And through February, we had billed about 1.8 million or 1.76, but we still had March through June to receive or to bill and receive. And so I forecasted that based off previous months. And so you can see I still think we're really, the revenue forecast is really inflated. So I'm asking managers, please give me a realistic number, what we're going to be, what we're bringing in. And so with that process, we have reduced the revenue forecast, an additional probably 200,000. Maybe 3. I'll have to see where I'm at after this billing cycle. The other thing is, so to bring this 500,000 closer to what our authority is, so we don't lapse that, we have to either decrease revenue or increase expenses. So the combination of that is what we're working on. We also have had some programs look at what they might be able to pre-purchase, like, expenses that they were going to have to purchase in fiscal year 24 that they can purchase now instead. And I think I've got about 100,000 there. So already I've reduced this by about 300,000, I think. The unknowns, what kind of got us here is, Bill mentioned mineral lease has kind of been up and down a couple 100,000 or 200,000. And even the 2.4 million that we currently have in the forecast is conservative. So that might even come in higher. And unfortunately, that's something we don't become aware of until like the last minute. We actually receive our June mineral lease payment in July, which is actually after closeout. It's in our period 13 closeout period. And so at that point, if we receive more money, we can't do anything with it. We just, and so.
We can't spend it, but we get credited. Got it.
Yeah, so that's something that's really hard. The other thing you might see, that, I don't know if you can scroll over to the right a little bit, so you can see the labels on the expenditures. Yeah, right there. See that personnel expenditure, the difference of the forecast at 378,000. That is savings in personnel from what we originally budgeted in our operating budget at the first of the fiscal year. So, as Bill mentioned and illustrated, we've had a lot of turnover this year. We've had some resignations, some retirements, so turnover savings is a savings from the period of, the time between when we're able to refill a position so that it's vacant. So we're saving that money. So that almost 400,000 is pretty significant for us. So that has contributed. I mean, that's saved our expenses, so that's increased our forecast.
In years past, we counted on those savings.
Yeah.
To get us through the end of the year.
So yeah, lots of moving targets. So we're working our best to minimize this. We can only do what we can do until, like I said, we still might get a surprise with winter release in July. So I'd like to move forward to how this impacts next fiscal year. So obviously we don't want to lapse any money or lapse as minimal as possible, because we really do need to carry forward as much as we can. Because next year, let's move on to next year's. Maybe you can bring up the colorful bill summary sheet.
I promise I'm not doing anything up here.
Look at that, Mark. I don't know what you're doing, but I sure got you.
I'm just sitting here.
Somebody's pretending to be there.
I hope not.
Is this where you want to go to? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think you had it open down below.
I do.
Yeah, bring that one open.
Yeah, bring it over the other screen.
So what I'm gonna show you here is just a summary of all the appropriation bills for next fiscal year from this previous session. And we always start with our base budget bill. So that's all the funding from the previous year minus any one-time funding. So that's our base budget. And then if there's some supplementals, that's usually, like our building blocks, or we've asked for an increase in funding estimates. So you'll see here on the supplementals, you'll have to go down just a little bit so we can see the top. You can see there, I did ask for an increase of $628,000 for mineral lease, because that has been higher than what was originally appropriated. So we want to, get that closer to what we're seeing. Those top numbers there in the purple, that's dealing with the that groundwater building block that Bill mentioned. So part of that's general fund, part of it's one-time general fund. And then we also had some federal funds to match that, because groundwater usually is able to match their positions with federal funds. That 1.8, it was interesting that, Bill mentioned that on the LiDAR, that initially got appropriated to us, and then they're like, oh wait, that should really go to forestry, fire, state lands. So they took it out, but really they're just going to probably contract with us to do it all. So I don't know, that's what that little in and out is.
We've had that conversation already. What it is that they have forest, fire, and state lands as a restricted account, and they're going to take the money out of their restricted account to fund this project, the LiDAR. So that's why they decided we'll write a contract if we need to. They'll just have us do it.
Yeah.
They'll probably just transfer us the money at the beginning of the year.
The other appropriation bill that we see is the ISF impacts and fees. ISF is an internal service fund, so that's just what we pay other state agencies that charge us fees for certain services. So that's the Department of Technology Services. They charge a fee to connect to the network or to give us desktop support, for example. We have fees for motor pool or telephones, that type of stuff. So that's just a little minimal amount there. Most of that is impacting technology services, where they increase their rates, and so we're going to pay those increased rates, and so they give us partial funding for that. Now the biggie, the compensation bill, you can see there it totals 1.1 million. So that's the impact. Now all of this is not the targeted increase. So that includes a 5% COLA. And the 5% COLA will be across the board, and it will move the ranges of the positions. So the top of the range will get moved as well. It includes some funding for increases in health insurance, that the state has to pay. But then it does include the targeted increases as well. Now, this is kind of a consolidated in a way you really can't, or presented in a way you really can't see the numbers that well, but just to mention the general fund portion there, those top two lines, if you add those together, 512,900. So, and that represents 45% of what was the total compensation impact. So what that means is 55% of it we have to come up with, which is about 617,500. So, and that's, they basically say, or consider, well, you're getting funding from these other sources, so you should be able to, get funding from them for your increased rates. And we can to a point with like our grants because when we do our grant proposals, we we cost those out, right? And we say, okay, we're gonna have these people work on it. This is what their rate is. But a lot of times those, we have multiple year contracts, right? And some of those have already started. And so we're gonna be behind on some of those. There's some that we enter into each fiscal year. And so we can use the current new rates and collect the current new rates and the, the additional other outside revenue. But a lot of them, we're not going to make that up. We're gonna have to find ways to make it up. So that goes back to my forecast, and that we want to carry over the maximum amount possible, because we're going to need it. We're going to need probably at least 600, 700,000 of it to help fund the compensation. And I have been kind of earmarking that and planning on that, and I will be fine. It will just cut our carry forward down quite a bit. So where we typically carried over like 750 to $1 million, that's going to drop down to 300, 400,000. So that cushion is just going to be a little bit smaller, but I think when we get into seeing how our new restricted fund panned out, I think we can go to the legislature and ask to have some of that money appropriated to us. We can't just dip into it. We have to have it appropriated. So they've already appropriated, I don't know how much this year, probably about 600,000 or so. Looks like maybe actually about 720,000 for the new severance tax. So we could ask for what they call a supplemental. So if you're in the middle of a session and you need money for that current fiscal year, that's a supplemental. So if we are into next fiscal year and we're like, we're going to need some more money, we can go and ask for additional appropriation from that fund at that time. Or we can even make the argument that this compensation bill was so much of a hit on our non-general fund that we actually need some additional general fund to do that. I mean, so there's still some ways to make that up. So any questions there? It's always just
And we are fortunate to have Jodi here to make sense of it for us.
That's what I can.
So you say that, you don't know what your severance tax is going to be. Do you have a clue? Do you have like a pretty good estimate, like the month before, say May?
Yeah, we've only received 2 quarters so far this funding allocated to us this year, and it's been about half of what our appropriation is, and we can only receive up to our appropriation. So this year it is going to be what it is, and the same with next year unless we ask for more. Like Bill was mentioning, that 600,000 that they swept last year will be coming back to us at some point. And we had a really good year last year, and so there's a difference on the fund, those restricted funds. There's a difference on how much we actually receive based on our appropriation and actually how much the fund actually earns. So it may be earning up here, but we were only appropriated here. So this difference we can go and ask for at a later date, and dip into.
But so the intent there is that you can build a rainy day fund. That's what I'm going to call a rainy day fund. And so the appropriation is based on a 3-year rolling average for the 3 previous years. And we get appropriated based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but they take it away from our general funds, the way the bill's written.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really change a lot. But if she said, if we collect more than that 3-year rolling average, that's what gets deposited as the excess into our account. And we can ask to get after that. So, and our hope is that next year's grant writings will then account for the higher salaries,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll be able to collect against those. But so you're kind of a year in arrears. You're trying to pay catch up with money in the bank.
Yeah, sometimes a couple years if you have like a 3-year grant
That's
or
true.
something, a multi-year grant. It just takes you a while to start collecting on those. Well, and actually we do collect on the higher rates, so we're actually having to do more with less because, you know, we're incurring those expenses towards the grant, and that's what I'm basing my billings on. But they're still gonna have to do the scope of work regardless, so, yeah, you know. But I can't bill for that.
Any questions on our finances for Jodi? No tag, Mark. You're a busy boy. I think we've covered all of this, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We got this already. Okay.
That's what I'm going to turn over to Mark. You want to bring up your PowerPoint?
It's in the shared drive.
Yep. Hang on a
Yeah, just
second.
open it. There's one.
I had it open, but you may have made a change, you said.
I didn't change it.
Look at that, actually,
Notifications, see what happens.
yeah. Right here, which is now on this screen. That look right?
Yep.
Yeah, I gotta go. Where does it start? I'm not at.
You on the, that'll work too. Microphone. Where do you want me to?
You can stand wherever you want. We have the speakers in the ceiling.
Anderson or whatever.
These are our microphones, I mean.
Okay. New job duties for me this year were legislative liaison. And it was a heck of a year to start. 933 bills and resolutions, which was a record as far as I can tell, the previous record being 10 years ago where there were 892. Those are bills and resolutions introduced, not passed. 567 House bills, 300 Senate bills, plus the funding requests in the mix. Okay, Bill. Oh, I was going to mention, luckily the state capitol building has had base isolators installed, and those are to protect the ground from the seismic actions of the legislature above. I think they worked.
Very good.
Next one. Yeah, so not all of those bills, of course, pass. There are a fair number of bills that do. The legislature works very hard at those bills, and House Bill 137 designated the state crustacean, which is the brine shrimp, and that's a quote by Mr. Craner about his sixth graders.
I was actually at that meeting.
Yes.
That's about you.
Huh?
If you click one more, there's just a brine shrimp. I've heard DNR is looking for somebody to step into the brine shrimp costume for events if anyone's interested. This bill, I mean, it's actually, I mean, it serves a purpose for raising awareness of Great Salt Lake and the ecosystem. Next slide. Oh, there, House Bill 396 was one that popped up sort of out of nowhere. It was
Talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. You just-
Originally city property ownership amendments, but it was actually about paleo resources and related to the Johnson Farm tract site in St. George, and it was amended with feedback from Natural History Museum and UGS to limit the scope of the bill, which was good. Senate Bill 123, boards and commissions. Originally, the bill as written would have repealed the Professional Geologist Licensure Board. There was feedback from many communities, including licensed geologists. The amended version that passed requires review of our board by September 30th, 2023. So hopefully Bill and UGA and AEG, thank you, are working on that issue.
I'm a little unclear. Who does the review of the board?
Sitla, or not Sitla, sorry.
Doppel.
Doppel, thank you. Doppel.
Do you know what they plan to do? Like how, what they're gonna look for, how they're gonna do that review?
Bill might have.
All the bill says, and DOPL is a division of occupational and professional licensing.
And they took $120 from me this year, so.
Yeah, Bill only got paid every 2 years.
That's right.
Texas, I pay 120 every year, and I'm paying half price because I'm an old guy.
I think that's something that'll be looked at is the fee, because we have extra money in that accounts.
Yeah, so the bill directs that the director of DeWall, and there's a whole list of boards, it's not just ours, there's a whole list of boards that they need to meet with representatives of that profession. And that director needs to do it by September 30th of this year. That's all it says.
If they don't like the review, the board still may go away.
Pardon me?
And if the review doesn't go well, the board still might go away, or how?
That's, to go away, they'd have to propose another bill next year to eliminate these boards. And they could return to that. But basically I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, would that do away with the licensing?
No.
Requirement? Oh.
They wouldn't have a board to review it, so just have no teeth. Where you get licensed.
Well, what they would do, what DeWall would do, is if there was a complaint made, they would then have to go hire some consultants that had the appropriate expertise to hold a hearing under their direction. That might include the state geologist on that. That's what they're still trying to figure out how that might look. One of the reasons, this emanated from the governor's office. So this wasn't, I mean, there's a legislator's name on the bill, but this came from the governor's office because there's 400 some odd boards across the state. And in theory, the legislature is supposed to, and the governor's office is supposed to oversee all of these and appoint people to be on them. And they've become so many, it's become a bit onerous. So they're trying to find a way to streamline it. One of the governor's aides said to me, is there another board that we might consider combining with? You know, like engineering board or something, you know, and it's possible. Those are some, but he said, one of the reasons you guys got targeted was, no, you've not had any complaints for quite a few years. You know, we've not as a board, and I'm now the chair of our board. But we've not heard any complaints brought before the Professional Geologist Licensing Board for quite a few years. And he was like, you guys are just, you know, you guys take care of yourselves. No big deal. And in some professions, the societies do this more than a state agency. Like, you know, like architects, something, and they've got some, you know, APG used to have one for licensing for geologists, you know, kind of a worldwide thing, but they would regulate it and keep their hands on that group because they wanted the accreditation from their society. In Utah, it's not like the UGA has a big bite. Anyway, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Radon notice amendments. So we work with radon program in DEQ a fair amount. And this bill would allow counties to include basically an information card or pack or paper with property tax notices for 2023 only. Information would be like effects of radon, presence in some homes, and the payability of testing. So that did pass. Other bills, and I'm not going over any of the financial bills because Jodi has already done that. There was an emissions reduction amendments, which requires an air quality study. That was geared towards MagCorp and pollution on the Wasatch Front. Mineral lease amendments, online disclosure of mineral lease applications, Great Salt Lake amendments, severance tax on lithium and metalliferous.
That could be a big one.
Yeah. Groundwater use amendments, it's related to aquifer recharge. Hydrogen, it creates a hydrogen advisory council, which we could be involved with storage. Oil and gas severance tax amendments doesn't affect UGS or OGM. It's above trend revenue to a transportation fund for some rural counties that have issues with transportation related. 119 per capita consumptive use prescribes how water use is calculated, which is actually something that was needed because it's a complex thing and different municipalities and water suppliers will calculate that differently. Severance tax revenue amendments bill, I think you already talked about that. Okay. And the next one. A lot of failed bills of interest to a lot of our employees. House Bill 412 would have eventually done away with career service status, so everyone would have been career service exempt. It passed the House committee and failed the House floor vote. House Bill 451, that would have prohibited statements for hiring and any paid training originally about racism, diversity, etc. That failed to pass the House floor. I mean, excuse me, it passed the House floor and it failed in the Senate, in a Senate committee. Senate Bill 28 was one we were more involved with, about radon. It would have created a mechanism and funding for radon test collection data in a ground with more resolution than just zip codes, because zip codes can be huge parts of the state. Senate Bill 110, background check modifications. That luckily didn't go anywhere. It would have affected us for Earth Science Week. It would have required any volunteers that are around children to have a criminal background check. So Utah is the volunteer state. It would have put the hurt on a lot of organizations, including us, but it didn't even make it to a committee. Other failed bills, there was a labor union amendment bill, which would have, right now, state employees can elect to have UPEA deductions taken out of their paycheck. It would have done away with that. Law enforcement was particularly interested in that bill. I don't know which, anyway, but employee organizations. State Trust Lands Administration that dealt with SITLA land sales. There was a Great Salt Lake funding bill that didn't pass. Fossil fuels tax, that was a carbon emissions tax that's floated every year and it's not going to go anywhere. Mining operations would have created a new oil, gas, and mining board member to adjudicate permit challenges. The board would have, but they would have had somebody else on the board. It also addressed some vested mining. Lithium severance tax amendments. It was severance tax on lithium. There's an issue with lithium brines and whether severance taxes are collected on those. Concurrent resolution on Great Salt Lake elevation. There was a target that was introduced by a Democrat. It was his first year, so it didn't go very well.
Well, and there's the other Senate bill that kind of, or House bill that took precedence over that.
For the lithium.
Yeah, for the lithium.
That was back.
There it is, House Bill 513. It's kind of duplicitous almost.
Yeah, so that's just a snapshot of a few of the bills that we tracked and looked at. Of course, there were many more. Any questions or recommendations or?
What was the House Bill 273 trying to do away with the land sales?
No, it was, do you know this bill? It was modifying SITLA land sales. It was targeting, I think
I didn't get involved in this one.
some representatives in rural areas are concerned about SITLA swapping out lands for, yeah, because they're going to miss out because their lands, which are low value, are being swapped for higher value lands. Like in St. George, for example.
San Juan's like, hey, why is all our land going over to Washington County?
Yeah, that type of thing.
Okay.
And take everything I say with a grain of salt, because a lot of these are very complex. And
So Mark really jumped in this year. There's a lot going on.
yeah, I still need to take a lot of excess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Strategic planning, this is you, Mike.
Right.
I don't see Jeremiah, huh?
Mind advancing?
No, I don't mind doing that.
I'll just speak from here. Yeah, like we're a little ahead of schedule with Jeremiah. Showed up and maybe talk about a field trip or something. So, but yeah, we wanted to make you aware of some strategic planning that we're in the middle of. The Governor's Office of Planning and Budget they have directed all state agencies to have a strategic plan put together by the end of this fiscal year. Many agencies have had them in the past, have one now, many don't. DNR is one that doesn't have a strategic plan in place. So the department is developing a plan and they're getting input from all of the divisions and offices. So UGS is contributing essentially a chapter to the DNR plan. A key thing that is included in the GOPB guidance for these plans is this statement about budget request forms. So when we do our building block requests moving forward, at least in the near term, budget request forms will include a requirement to connect the request to the agency's goals as outlined in their strategic plan. So the governor's office really wants a clear connection between what the agency thinks is important and what we're asking for money to do. Let's go to the next one, Bill. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but the components to what we are working on include goals, objectives, strategies, and also some performance measures. And the goals, I mean, this, in a way, this is kind of an interesting and I think useful exercise. These are supposed to be very high-level, outcome-based targets, things that we would like to see kind of affected in the state of Utah by what we do. And, you know, a 4 to 5 year time frame. So really, really big picture stuff. It's easy for us to just kind of have our noses down in our work and, you know, we all kind of intuitively understand the inherent value of what we do. But thinking in these lines, I think is good to just get a little different perspective on why are we doing what we're doing, or why aren't we doing something that we should be doing. Okay, and then objectives is just a little more focused on, okay, what can we do to achieve these big, broad picture goals? And then the strategies are really kind of where we all live at the moment. You know, these are kind of the day-to-day things and the projects that we're working on now. So that stuff, you know, 1 to 2 year time frame. So, you know, that's kind of a typical project lifespan for us. So yeah, it just kind of broadens our thinking a little bit. Let's go to the next one, Bill. So Bill and I have been soliciting input from our program managers as to what they see the goals for each of their programs being, you know, for the next few years. And we need to be able to tie those goals into these DNR key themes. And so DNR had put together a mission statement a while back. We had some input into that, and out of that mission statement come these key themes. The first one is pretty straightforward. You know, it has to do with water issues, surface water and groundwater, and our groundwater and wetlands program, that work just fits nicely into that theme. The second one, and let's see, can you hit yeah, go ahead and advance. So up until just a couple of weeks ago, this one on health and resilience, it didn't include any wording related to resilience. And it was a little bit difficult to see where our geologic hazards work fit into the DNR key themes, the way that they were worded. And as Bill mentioned earlier, you know, we've been asking for funding for landslide hazard work for few years now, and it's going nowhere. So we circled back with DNR and talked about that issue, and they agreed, yeah, we could add something about resilience, because that really, a hazard theme fits with that pretty well. We threw in resources into that thing as well. So we kind of changed up that language, and I'm happy with that. And I think it'll help in terms of this kind of direct connection between some of our hazards work. Let's see, and next slide, I'm going to highlight another one here. So, another issue that we've run into is the paleo thing we talked about this morning, and trying to get funding there. There really wasn't anything real obvious in the themes that might
From the
at the DNR level to help us tie into with any kind of paleo goals that we had. So we ended up adding a natural history component to this public lands key theme. The resources also in the health and resilience. We're hoping between those two that we can show a clear path between, or connection between, our funding request for paleo work and these themes. So, the recreation theme, that doesn't really directly affect us. Energy and minerals, that was straightforward. And then just kind of a general one about department culture and employee retention and professional development, that kind of thing. Okay, next slide. So we ended up with, I believe, 7 goals that fit into about half of those DNR key themes. So we've got a couple goals for our groundwater and wetlands sections. They're worded almost identically, just one of them has to do with groundwater and the other one with wetlands, and providing good objective data for informed decision making. Again, just a big picture goal. Go to the next one. The hazards one, providing comprehensive data, information, and emergency response to reduce the state's economic, property, and life safety risk from hazards. Energy and minerals, we continue to responsibly develop our energy and mineral resources and needs. Next slide. Public lands one, this is where the geologic mapping and paleogeologic, even our geologic mapping was difficult to have a good strong connection to the key themes before. So hopefully it's better now. So we've got one, addressing updated mapping, 3D, addressing resource and development needs, and then for paleo, promoting, conserving, informing the public of our unique paleo resources. Is there one more? Yeah, and we had a people one too. We successfully promote personal professional growth with employees. I believe there's at least, maybe a couple more.
Are you in this?
In that shot.
I don't think I am. You're in the front there. Isn't that you in the front?
Maybe I am.
Well, hey,
This was last. This was last year. Oh, yeah.
I want to be there.
It's good boss.
Where's Becky?
I know, it's like.
Where's Riley?
In the middle.
That's not Riley, that's Gordon.
I was drinking my Dr. Pepper over at the side.
Which side?
Yeah.
Anyway.
So this effort is going on now, and kind of parallel to that, I'm wanting to develop a strategic plan that is specific and focused on UGS by itself. And so we've kind of got this template for the DNR plan that we need to fit this stuff into. The UGS plan, we can kind of do what we want, but we've got some flexibility there. And as we develop that plan, I would love to run like drafts by the board for input, and just to have you all kind of thinking, from your perspectives, You know, what do you see the UGS looking like 5 years down the road? You know, what should our work be focusing on? What maybe should we not be doing? I mean, we're faced with some interesting decisions coming up. You know, right now there's so much state map and other federal funding that, you know, we got to decide. We've been in the mode for so long of going after every dollar that we can possibly get. And now it's like, if we did that,
Kill ourselves.
Yeah, we're already stretching our existing staff pretty thin.
Is that because you have to do the dollar for dollar match with that?
Yeah.
Is there any way you could set up a funding mechanism where that's, you don't have to do that?
That's determined by the grant itself, whether it's the match is 50% or 80% but state map is 50-50 and their.
That's just US Congress.
And their overhead is
required
maxed at 18%, where our overhead, I calculate each year and it's in the 30s. So, yeah.
So, yeah, like I said, there's no negotiating that. Now, that being.
We've been handling this by hiring temp employees. So that's where we've seen a lot of our growth lately. Particularly with state map is hiring the temporary employees. Because, you know, the funding that we're getting is temporary and we have to match it, but we, like Bill said, we still have to come up with that match.
We still have to come up with that.
Temporary employees, like, bring students in as interns or?
We've done some students, but also some people that are like just out of school, postdocs. We had Julia here. She finished her PhD and she was gonna help us on CO2. She was here a few months, and then the National Energy Technology Lab stole her away. 40% change in salary. So I'm just hesitant as an agency to hire somebody in as a career track employee on a grant that may only last for a year or two, where I can't ensure that they're going to have a job in 3 years. For me, that's just a line I've drawn. And I don't think some of the program managers want to just hire them anyway. And I'm like, well, you know, I think Jodi's on board with where I am. It's a better way to manage our dollar. I just hate to make that promise. Because the promise
The
has,
mapping program, you know, how many did we have 5 years ago in the mapping program?
about what we have now.
Okay, so it's not, I haven't grown ahead.
We had Bob, Grant, Doug.
We have grown.
Don, John.
We've grown by Keely. We've grown by probably at least 3 or 4, but
more on the GIS side.
So you
Yeah,
maintain
those are
that
support,
kind of flat,
support.
and then the guys that retired, you kept them as contractors, and that's how you've been able to grow.
Yeah, exactly.
we have a couple.
Doug is still working
Doug and Bob.
quite a bit. Bob's working.
I think
Grant
Hylland.
intends to. Some of those guys have to wait a certain amount of time before they can come back and do things. Like, we did that with Gordon. He had to be gone for a certain amount of time before he could come back and work part-time for us. Yeah, we're trying to find ways to manage it, but there are other grants like DOE, Department of Energy, they say no match, but in every proposal anyone puts out, they go for 20%. Because it's kind of the unwritten rule. You know, you gotta have a certain amount. We occasionally get from the USGS hey, we've got an extra $100,000 that if you could work on this, and it comes with no strings attached. The Earth MRI money has come without really any strings attached. That makes those programs easier to hire for. So it did in groundwater, most of those grants are like 2080.
Wetlands all the wetlands are 75-25. The EPA are 75-25.
EPA.
But groundwater has a lot of non-federal. They have a lot of like contracts and transfer from other,
And those are 50/50.
the other departments. Yeah, we do a lot of work for other agencies.
When we work for water rights, they generally want it to 50/50.
Yeah, so a lot of those are 50/50.
It really varies.
Yeah, well, it was just a question. I appreciate your strategic planning. It's a big effort, but it pays off. We just included a year-long strategic planning session in my organization, and this is our second or third round in the last 10 years, and it pays off.
Good.
And really focus.
If you've got guidance or
Keeps you
suggestions for
focused.
us, we would love to hear from you.
We're in the process now of kind of refining how we want to look at it more granular, like with the different teams and how we achieve some of the goals. But one thing that we did that was really very helpful for us, we identified, we call them strategic imperatives. And they're kind of like major, I would say either goals or pillars of who we are and what we'll do. So nothing really gets passed in, even consideration unless it fits in one of those imperatives. We have 6 imperatives. Very helpful.
Good. Well, Mike, maybe we have someone we can bounce your plan on.
Yeah, like I say, yeah, I'd love to have this be kind of a collaborative effort, I guess, with any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, concerns you have, and even getting down to how we actually pull this together. Outside funding things, it's always uncertain how sustainable certain funding sources are. State map and with MRI, I mean, there's just a flood of money at the moment. Probably not going to last.
No, and we're actually hearing, I heard in a meeting I had the other day with 5 or 6 other state geologists. Most of them are hearing from their federal legislative liaisons that they're expecting to see cuts in the coming years. That the growth is going to stop. And there'll be there may be some efforts to start dialing it back. Like I said, state map, there's a program that has just gone from 500,000 a year to over 1 million, like 1 million a year, potentially available for every state. That's a lot of money. Earth MRI was a big tranche of money that came, congressional mandate to map as people became worried about critical resources, but that's not long term. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah. Any way that we can be proactive as far as like the growth of our groundwater group, as opposed to reacting to outside, influences of, gain more control over that, I guess.
And you have more flexibility in the people you hire. I mean, I know people specialize in their scientists, but if you have people that you hire that can both map when that's a need or work for your groundwater when that's a need, it seems that flexibility would be really valuable.
Yeah. Kind of along those lines too is opportunities for remote workers in different parts of the city.
Yeah.
That we've never done. I mean, maybe that's part of that our people thing, and if that's a strategy that we want to.
You guys got people in Teach City that seems to work well. Silva's got people in Bernau that seems to work really well for them.
Yeah.
Got people.
So if we're mapping, down in southeast Utah, if we had somebody that was down there.
I'd like to put the director in Severe County.
In Joseph or something?
Joseph, yeah. That's a good place now that you mentioned it. It's not a bad place. Right in the center. Yeah, right in the center of the state. Okay.
I think that's all I've got, unless there's any other comments, questions.
Or any projects filtering down from the VIL or the IRA through either DOE?
Not to DNR, yes, not necessarily to us.
Not necessarily. So I was just curious.
I think this is what we talked about, if I'm trying to remember, for a field trip in the fall. Does this sound right? Work our way out through Delta. I think Dave, were you on this? What's that? Oh, Sam.
Sam sent me an email, he had arranged for a visit at IPP. He's got that set up for a stop there. So we still have to put, I'll confess, we put a lot of time and effort into planning all the details of this trip, but I just thought I'd put it on a map, see if this is what everybody else recollected.
Okay. And this is where I think it's, give it to Jeremiah.
Can you upload it on your computer?
I think I've got it. No, this is just this is a placeholder in my slide deck.
Nice.
So this is Jeremiah. If you've not met Jeremiah. Hello. So we should start calling you Dr. J. You're tall.
When my family starts doing that, then I'll
He now has the doctor title, so yeah. Okay.
So what I have. I believe, is this the one that was?
Yep, that's it.
Bring it over. I'm gonna do one thing. Let me do it as a window. And then when I go to that, it's just a window. So this is the right version.
Yeah, 0406. Yeah, that's the right one.
Okay. So this is Jeremiah. And you can stand anywhere you want. We have microphones up.
Sure. And if it's all right, I'll just ask you to
Please, yeah. Happy to do
slides
that.
as we go.
Yeah.
So I'm Jeremiah. I recently completed my PhD, and that was at the University of Utah, working on the Bonneville salt flats for 5 years. So fortunately, I was able to carry all of those data sets with me and working knowledge with that when I started the survey. Just some background knowledge. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the issues around the salt flats, but basically it's been getting smaller for several decades now. So they started taking measurements back in 1960, and then over time it's decreased about a third in terms of the total halite volume. It's also been gradually decreasing in just total area over time. And this has been a big concern because this is one of the national landmarks. It's a national historic landmark, in part because it's world famous for racing. So people go out there and they've been studying world records. I think the highest world record there is around 600 miles per hour, which if you've even been there and seen a car go 300 miles per hour, it's just like a blink on the eye. In addition to that, this is all, for the most part, Bureau of Land Management land. But some complicating issues are they also have a large potash mine to the south of the highway, and they've been collecting potash brines from the salt flats for about 100 years. And since 1997, they've been actually doing an experimental restoration program where they actually pump water from the alluvial fans, dissolve waste products, so that's halite, in the potash mine, and then pump it back across the salt flats. So they've been doing that for over 25 years now. And we've been still doing it. It never had the expected outcomes that were desired, though. They thought it would grow the crust. They didn't see a large increase in the crust after that. So that's just some framing information. And this is a presentation I gave to our stakeholders meeting last week, kind of discussing where we see the directions with the research going.
So is the mine recovering both potash and halite or just potash?
It's just brine. So what it'll do is it has these huge evaporation ponds, like miles by miles on size. And so those will actually evaporate out brine, and you'll have a evaporate device occurring. So gypsum will crystallize out, and then halite, and then they just have to evaporate a lot to eventually get to the potassium saturation.
Yeah. But the salt is a byproduct.
But they're recovering it and taking that away.
Yeah, they're pulling that when they're doing that, and so
they're not taking it away and selling it.
No, it's
trying to push it back on to the flats.
Okay. Yeah. And so with the laydown program, they have over the past 25 years put twice as much salt back onto the salt flats as they have pulled out, and that's because they have such a large reserve of halite with the mine, and they also are mining salt from areas south of the highway, as well as a deep brine aquifer. Yeah, that's intrepid potash. All right.
And maybe I'll touch this, but they currently have some mine locations on the flats in certain areas. And so under their lease agreements with the BLM requires them to push a certain amount out. Now, those leases may be suspended, is that the right
Yes.
word? Which then raises the question, will they even be required to push salt out while those are in suspension? We don't know the
Yeah,
answer.
and that's a big unknown. If they'll get the suspension, if they'll get that, but
Yep. Anyway, okay.
yeah. So that's
Just a little background.
background. And so here's a highlight of some of the ongoing work that we've been doing at UGS. So this is a weather station here with a drone image that Bill actually took. And you can see this is actually a state-of-the-art weather station that's part of the eddy covariance flux network across the state of Utah that Groundwater has been developing. So we have 1.5 years of data from that, including evaporation data. And so this is probably the most precise way of measuring evaporation that we have available. And so I'm really excited about having that data set because we can actually use that to understand how much water is moving into the system from rain and how much is moving out of evaporation. And then we compare that with our groundwater monitoring network. So there's over 100 wells distributed across the salt flats because researchers just love coming back to it every 15 years and doing this new study because it keeps on getting worse in quality. And so we have 40 different wells that we have transducers in that we're monitoring the groundwater levels changing. And the goal with that is to understand how water is moving through the system over time, if there's any consistent long-term trends, if the brine they're adding onto the salt flats, where is that moving when we actually measure that. In addition to that, I've been actually building a compilation of all of the publications or published data around the salt flats. And so that goes back to 1925, but that's over 1,000, about 4,000 geochemistry measurements from the salt flats, as well as maybe 10,000 groundwater level measurements. So it's a huge data set. And by having that kind of data, we can actually look at what long-term trends are and try to identify what's driving some of these changes. I think we're ready for the next slide. So here is one thing I'm kind of proud of. We have a little community-driven time-lapse station out at the end of the access road. So here you can see Paul, basically it's a pole, and you put your phone in there and take a photo, and then that actually gets uploaded and instantly added to this little time-lapse camera station. What's really nice is you can use that to understand how variable the surface of the salt flats are, because this is at the very end of the access road here. When I was out there and installed that, there was probably about 1.5 to 2 feet of water there, and that'll all dry up. Other things that are cool that we've seen is actually there was a really windy day and all that water just blew away one day. It was gone for a couple days and it just gradually settled back across the system.
That's how Moses got across the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Winds came.
So it's a pretty cool thing to have there. And I also have my personal goal of just having that there because you never know when you go do field work if it's flooded there and if you need to bring the four-wheelers or other things. So this gives us a pretty high, this gives us a better idea of what the conditions are out there so we can just plan accordingly. And that's all publicly available. Anyone can contribute to it and anyone can look at it.
I showed him a picture earlier from the camera on the weather station.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's my other favorite thing. If I need a mental break, I'll just be checking that. Crazy things happened this year. We saw actual ice out at the end of the weather station, which with brine at that like salinity, I didn't think it was possible. So weird things happened this year, and it's a lot of water out there. As another thing that I built, yeah.
So there's the camera and there's that community one.
Yes. Yeah, so the community one is just dependent on who's there and who wants to take a photo. Whereas, yeah, this time-lapse camera takes pictures every 5 minutes.
Where's the line picture?
And so what's nice with that is you can actually look at and see
that's now
salt crystallizing. You can see water movement across the salt flats. It's a much higher resolution thing. And then that's also paired with our weather station measurements too.
So 11 o'clock.
It's also nice to get a little selfie when you're out there with that camera.
Okay.
Okay. So
Want to go here?
this one, yes.
Okay.
So another thing I worked on was building a UGS geodata archive. So this is something we have within UGS. And basically I use this to consolidate a lot of information that I've been pulling together or things that have been pulled together from prior studies. For example, the BLM had just two giant boxes full of files. I went through, we actually had those scanned and then uploaded some of those as well as imagery. And so that way we know that that data has been preserved, and then also that future iterations researchers have that resource to go back and look at. In addition to that, we actually have stitched together old aerial imagery so we can actually understand what the spatial extent of the salt flat was over time, as well as when different features, for example, lots of berms and dikes and other things were constructed on the salt flats. Like one cool thing I've noticed with that is there were actually pretty large springs on the edge of the salt flats in the alluvial fan area. And I actually went through and found the water rights reports for those. And those are completely dry now, and the water level is about 50 feet below the surface. So there's been a lot of things changing within that area. But that is a really nice resource. And I also have a compilation of everything ever published that I was able to find on the salt flats. It's not everything, but there's 300 to 400 documents referenced in there, as well as a timeline compilation about the geologic as well as human timelines. So that includes records and major events on the salt flats. And this is also a great resource because you can actually search by area. So for example, if I wanted to get a picture of the weather station for this talk, I would just zoom in on that area of the map and pull that picture out. Okay, next slide. So that's just background information. And now this is moving into kind of our conceptual model for changes around the salt flats, specifically trying to think about how groundwater levels are influencing the system. And so when I first started thinking about this project, really the thing that came to me, especially looking at studies from other saline pans, is it's really about groundwater and where water is moving within the system. So I like to say where the water goes, that's where the salts go to. So here you can see our kind of very simplified schematics of the Bonneville salt flat. So here we have a cross section where this is the area to the east and water's flowing in from that. Our alluvial fan aquifer, water's flowing in from that, and then actually from below, water's flowing in and feeding the saline pan. And so with all that water coming in, there's only really one way for it to be removed, and that's by evaporation. And if you do that long enough, you're gonna build a salt crust there. The most simplest way of looking at that, that's just a bowl. If you add water to a bowl on any part of it, it's going to flow down towards the center and be removed by evaporation, leaving a saline pan. Next slide. So then this is kind of our model for what's happened and how the system has been altered over time by different human interactions. First of all, on the eastern side of the salt flats, there's been an extraction ditch. And basically that is limiting the movement of groundwater and surface water from the greater Great Salt Lake Desert into that area. In addition to that, there's been railroad tracks as well as Interstate 80, and those are blocking a lot of groundwater and surface water movement into the salt flats from the south, as well as majorly the potash mines. So that's stopping water from moving into the system. And then most recently, so in about the past 20, 25 years, the groundwater levels in the alluvial fan have really started to drop quite just very dramatically, and I'll be showing you that data. And so it looks like we're probably losing groundwater level from the salt flats to the alluvial fan. And actually we have a lot of data to support that, such as groundwater isotopes, salinity measurements, as well as just measurements of water levels at different spots.
The alluvium groundwater's dropped because Wendover's pumping more water?
All that water is being pumped for the potash mine operations and the laydown. Yeah, so again, we've just taken our simple bowl model and we've inverted it. So even if we are adding water to the salt flats of this system, it's very easy for it just to flow out of the system. So that's not really a long-term sustainable solution. And even long-term, if we were to stop pumping, I don't know how long it's going to take some of these things to basically recover for water to start flowing back into the system. So basically, under those conditions, you can't really sustain the saline pan long term. All right, next slide. Yeah, and then the next part will really focus on that alluvial band aquifer section. So here is a map from a publication that is under review right now. And basically for that, I separated the salt flat into different sections and looked at different areas in terms of how the salinity is changing. In the future, we'll be looking at how groundwater levels are changing across the larger area. But really for this presentation, we're going to focus on this area over here to the southwest, specifically over here. So here we have the different alluvial fan wells, and these are drilled anywhere from 80 to 300 feet deep, on average maybe 150 feet deep. And there's 20 of these wells. A lot of them are no longer active anymore, and the core production area is right over here. In addition to that, I have another transect of wells that was installed by USGS in the 90s, and that actually gives us a really nice transect to understand basically how groundwater is moving from the salt flats area towards the alluvial fan area. Next slide. So here is a map, or here's a plot showing our water depth. So that's water depth in feet over there versus our date. So starting around the 1947, so that's when they first drilled these wells, and actually these wells had a water level that was 10 to 20 feet above the surface when they first drilled them, and then that dropped down. And then here is the present date, so 2020, and you can see the water level is 50 to 60 feet below the surface now. And then some recovery, but then it just very dramatically fell after the mid 80s. And so that is, these two measurements are from this area here in the middle at the center of the primary production well area. Okay, next slide. And then one thing I'd like to highlight is the laydown, so them pumping these wells even more to dissolve the waste halite product and pump it back out into the salt flats, began in 1997. And you see right around that period, a very large drop in the alluvial fan water levels. You also see a big jump in the actual extraction rates from the alluvial fan levels. And another comment I want to say about that is I went and looked at different wells within the Great Salt Lake Desert, because USGS has a pretty good database for that were located in similar settings. Those are all relatively flat over the same entire time period. So it's not climate that's doing this. It's our increased water extraction over that period. So the next part is going to focus on these two transects, the alluvial fan wells and then this nested monitoring well network. So here are two slides that I'm going to just kind of walk over through time. So here's our alluvial fan network. So from the southwest to the northeast, that's about a 5-mile area. And then just comparing density measurements over time. So I prefer density measurements because I wrote a methods paper on it, but also because labs always mess up our geochemistry measurements, and density seems to be one of the more robust things that you can measure. So when they first drilled all of those wells, unfortunately, they just lumped all the geochemistry together, but they were all pretty much fresh water that they were producing. And here you can see our elevation. So this is the alluvial fan moving out towards the saline pan. This is our little transect over there. And so the black line is showing the ground surface. So in 1925, you can see the water levels there. And then 1950, this is some of those deeper alluvial fan wells they drilled. So the water level was above the surface. Next slide. Over time, so moving into the 1970s, we could see increasing density in the alluvial fan wells, specifically here at the center of the big pumping area. And then also there is a noted decrease in water level in the alluvial fan area. And so when the USGS published in 1979 about the salt flats, they expressed some concern about this decline in alluvial fan water level and losing salt towards that area. Next slide. So then moving forward into the early 90s, unfortunately, USGS did not get that many measurements over there. But this is the period after we had the wet 1980s, when basically the alluvial fan water levels pretty much recovered to what they were just after drilling. So pretty level with the surface. And you can see it's a pretty flat hydraulic gradient. So there's not that much potential during that period for water to be flowing out there. So when the USGS did their estimate of water loss, they said it was relatively small towards the alluvial fan. Next slide. And so if we move in over time here, in the 90s, you can see a large increase specifically at the center of the alluvial fan in density. Next slide. And then if we move into 2007, 2012, another large increase. And another thing I want to note is just that the peak density keeps increasing over time. Next one. And then here we move into our modern measurements. So you can see now the density in some of these areas is about 1.05. So the density of seawater is 1.02 to 1.03. The density of halite saturated brine, so the brine along the salt flats, is 1.2. But this is just gradually increasing over time. And we also see that our water level measurements, so saline pan, alluvial pan, have really dropped dramatically. And you can see there's this very notable drawdown curve there. In addition to that, we've actually measured the salinity across all these areas and noted some changes in salinity over time. So between 1990 and the present, as well as changes in the water isotopes. So that's all suggesting that we have water moving from underneath the salt flat towards the alluvial fan. And the next steps really will be using density and stable isotopes, as well as hydrological modeling to kind of constrain how much water we're losing from this area. But the really big concern with this is the number one source, or it's the only source of water that they use for the laydown. And the laydown is the number one thing that most people have been advocating for when they say we need to restore the salt flats. And I just don't see a future in which we can pull on this aquifer too much harder and not have increasingly negative side effects on the Bonneville salt flats.
What does the chart say about this?
So we had our conversation last week about this, and it's an ongoing conversation. I think it's something that the whole group's just trying to wrap their head around right now, just because it is quite a concern. And another thing I failed to say about this groundwater that they're pulling from the alluvial fan is based on radiocarbon dating. It's somewhere between 10 and 15,000 years old. So it's not likely this is a renewable water source, at least not on human timescales. It's concerning, and it'll be interesting to see where the conversation goes forward about managing this resource and figure out what landscape management practices. For example, if you are to do the laydown, what would be a better water source in the future?
So do you mind if I follow up on that? When we started, when he said a stakeholder meeting, it was a meeting with BLM, Intrepid, us, Brenda Bowen from University of Utah, and the Racing Association. They were all in this meeting. We've been meeting for about a year and a half now. Every few months, there's about to talk about it. So we got this $1 million to fund this. And I said, this is a game changer. This really, the belief has always been, and called last fall, in the news, there was racers saying, we don't need no more dang studies. We know that if we just lay down more, we're going to get salt growth. And they have proposed that that the feds provide $50 million in funding, $10 million a year for the next 10 years to significantly increase the amount of salt laydown. And what this is, and even at the beginning of the last meeting, remember the Racing Association was saying, we just need to know when we can start getting the laydown going up. Remember that? And I just sat there and took a deep breath. And when he got done, basically showing that the harder we pump, the more we're negatively affecting the ability. Because it turns out, I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically that water coming down to the edge of the salt pan, coming towards it, and that water underneath then comes up and the salt grows from the bottom up.
That's how it should be happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they think, so we think that the salt laydown has probably only slowed down the disappearance of the salt pan. But at the end of the meeting, the racers go, so where can we get more water? And Intrepid, and you don't know this yet, but Eric called me a day or two later, and said, maybe what we do is we quit pumping and we just turn the salt flats into our evaporation pond. We use that as the pond and we draw water from that. We don't take any more water out.
Right.
We just move our pond out there and we pump out of that as we need it.
That would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, my point is Jeremiah's work has got these folks to start rethinking just the fact that Eric was willing to make that call and have that conversation, which wouldn't have happened a year ago, but it's the leading with science, you know, that is really changing. And I think it's going to change in the long run how we all view how to manage salt pans, not just here, but elsewhere around the world. I think it's going to have big impact science. So I mean, take away, but they're thinking about it.
Did you show where the laydown happens?
I did not, but if you want to go back a couple slides to that overview map. We just passed it. There we go. Yeah, so here's the potash mine here. And so they pump it in right here. It kind of gets redirected and then moves along the salt flats that way.
But I don't think it ever gets very far, maybe halfway.
Unless there's wind, in which case the water can move it around, or if it's a really wet year. So if you're putting water on top of water, which is what I've been advocating for, it's kind of hard to pick out that little thing because it is relative to the amount of precipitation that gets put onto the salt flats. It's a relatively small volume.
There was also a problem. It's the dash line. Is that your Soldero berm?
Yeah, so here is the Soldero berm. So I'm guessing this would be where, if they were to make that into an evaporation pond, they put it there.
But what they had done is they had cut a, because the racers wanted a shortcut to the track, they cut a hole in the berm with the permission of the BLM. And so a lot of the water that we pumped out, they pumped out, was getting diverted through the berm and not making it. So a year ago, we asked them to repair the berm so we could keep that flow directed out to the flats. And they did it last year, but there was quite a few years where the breach was there and it was sucking away from where it should be going.
It was amazing. On the satellite imagery, you could just see the water kind of gushing out like a delta just through that break.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is they repaired that berm in the 90s as part of the beginning of the laydown program. And yet then they were like, oh, well, we need a gap instead. And
another racers.
Yeah. Another nice thing is people are getting stuck in those gaps all the time. So the fact they're sealed now is an improvement.
This is good stuff. I don't know, I get excited. I'm not even a salt guy.
Yeah, so that's the big thrust of a lot of research. There's some other things I've been working on. For example, there's some really interesting trends in this slide here, showing changes in density, specifically in the shallow brine aquifer. So the first about 20 feet is mostly lacustrine sediment, but it has a really high hydraulic conductivity. So it's very fractured and there's some sandy intervals in that. So water can flow through it a lot faster than you would anticipate given its mineralogy and grain size. And basically what we've seen over time is that this area here has the largest or one of the largest declines in salinity over time. And I think that's because we're moving salt this way, but unlike on this side where you have a large salt flat that can actually dissolve to buffer changes in salinity, it doesn't have that. And then right here, we see a decline in salinity over time. That's the largest. What's really interesting to me, though, is actually in the past 20 years, it has stopped declining and started increasing a little bit, which either means the laydown's working or it suggests that they actually did not extract as much brine from that area. They extracted about half their historical rate in the past decade. So maybe it's not mining as much, which would be really interesting to see with this proposed suspension. Here we see a little bit of a decline in salinity, but again, it looks like it's stabilized and is maybe increasing. But we see the largest increases or some pretty large increases over here on the alluvial fan area. So that's one suggestion that we have brine moving into the alluvial fan here. And then the largest increase again is in those alluvial fan wells, which is just nuts that they were fresh at one point and now they're producing saltier than the ocean. And then list of all the publications that are currently in review or out recently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think.
Any other questions?
No, I think thank you for coming. That was.
Yeah.
I hope you guys, to me, that was huge. That was a huge rethink. And it couldn't have been done without the funding that we got. Steve Handy, I don't know if you remember the story of that, but the racist told Steve Handy that if he got $5 million from the state, the feds would pony up the $45 million. Remember that? And that never happened. So basically that 5 million got pared down to 1 million, which we have put to good use. We ultimately just decided, we were kind of waiting for someone to take the lead. It's like, no one is. So we just said, we're going to do it. And we jumped in and we were able to engage Jeremiah and his advisor Brenda beforehand, and then keep Jeremiah on the project. So I think we felt fortunate that he carried over to us.
Oh, another thing I failed to mention is Brenda has a PhD student working on this too, largely with satellite data as well as GPS information. So I'm excited to see what they come up with. Specifically, I think we can do some really exciting things relating the surface area of the salt flats to changing and weather and climate. So, because that's one signal that I know it's probably affecting the salt flat, but we just don't know what degree is affecting the salt flat.
We'll be really curious as to, with all the water this year, that we're well instrumented. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's quick. So I was reviewing one of your papers yesterday.
Thank you.
And, something that you've, or are discovering is kind of revising sort of some common geologic concepts about the origin of the salt flats. Do you have just a quick sound bite to kind of summarize what you're finding there? I think it might be really interesting.
Yeah, thanks. So we've always thought the salt flats were just the remnants of the Lake Bonneville. So Lake Bonneville, 30,000 to about 13,000 years ago, giant lake about equal in size to Lake Michigan. It evaporated, and we thought, oh, when it evaporated, it probably left a lot of salt, and that's what's created the salt flats. We actually went out and took cores from the salt flats, looked at them with Jack Oviatt, who has written the majority of the papers most recently on the Bonneville on Lake Bonneville, and we don't see any Lake Bonneville sediments there. And at first I thought, oh, maybe we need to go a little bit deeper. No, it's not that. And then we actually dated the material. So it turns out that after Lake Bonneville, sometime between 13,000 and 8,000 years ago, about 2 meters of sediment was just removed by erosion, specifically in the area right around the Bonneville salt flats. It's still left in a lot of the rest of the Great Salt Lake Desert, but not right there at the Bonneville salt flats. And then only around 8,000 years ago do we begin to see deposition of the salt flats. And really, it really only looked like the current iteration of salt flats around 5,500 years ago. So it's a lot younger than we thought it was. And I think that places some of the current changes in perspective, specifically how will climate affect this system, but also we're doing a lot of effort to manage something that is, I mean, geologically everything is ephemeral, but this is more ephemeral than we thought it was.
Yeah. Is it wind erosion?
Yes. Yeah, wind erosion.
Did you see Greg Carling's talk at UGA?
I've seen iterations of it, yeah.
Yeah, because he's talking about sources of dust from Wasatch Snowpack and saying Great Salt Lake Desert is a big source.
Yeah.
Which kind of is interesting, related to decrease in the salt pan, which is exposed to more material that can be blown away.
Right. And another thing related to dust. So I recently came by a paper talking about chlorine isotopes in rainfall, and it turns out this area has probably 6 times more chlorine than other areas. And all of it is, I think they called it isotopically dead. And so they suggested a lot of that salt's coming from the salt flats. They didn't put an actual number to how much salt might be removed from the salt flats by that, but that might be another way we're losing material from the area.
Lots of interesting stuff coming.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're glad he's here. But I was very intrigued by Eric, who's an operations manager at Intrepid, that you've got him rethinking how they might redo the whole operation. That's insightful. That's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, I mean, it's overdue. For
Now we got to go for a visit.
Yeah.
You sent me an email. We got to get out there. They want us to come out. Okay, I don't have anything else. I'm done. You have anything else for us?
Well, I was just gonna ask if you know what the date is in June for the picnic.
We do.
And also with the cross reward material we had to
Yeah.
shuttle bus drives.
We just, I think it was last week, I sent out the call for nominations. So those will be coming in over the next few weeks.
Okay.
June 8th, Thursday, June 8th.
Is the big.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Same place?
Same place, yeah, Canyon Run.
June 8th.
Park again.
Am I on the wrong day?
Yeah.
Picnic, yes. It's on my calendar.
So yeah, so we'll have the nominations forwarded to you all. At least like 3 weeks before picnic time. So
You're all invited to the picnic.
Yes. Please come.
Okay, even Jay and Jack.
You know, that's the same time as the MT conference.
Is it? When is it? Okay.
I didn't.
That's good.
That's the
Mesozoic Terrestrial
Oh,
Conference. Is it that whole week? It's not on my calendar, so I don't know.
It was like,
It may not matter.
I just looked it up, the 8th through the 10th.
Oh, okay. It starts that day. That's probably when field trips may begin. Okay, we'll visit that. I know we got to be in Denver and Glenwood the weekend after that. Yeah. Okay. June 8th for the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jay.
Are we ready to adjourn?
Jackie.
Okay, it's now 11:28. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.